So I think we should get started, Omer, if it's okay. I'm going to do a brief introduction.
Yes, please.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Okay. So welcome everyone to the first Digital Health Conference of 2021, organized by Open Silicon Valley in collaboration with Folio 3 and Mentors Fund. We are very excited that you joined us today. We have an amazing audience from around almost 28 countries, including the US, England, Canada, UAE, Australia, and South America, to name a few, South Africa, to name a few. I wanted to give a big thank you to all our panelists who are here with us on their Saturday morning to share their wisdom and their experiences in digital health. I also want to thank Omer Khan, who is the founding partner of Mentors Fund and also the chairman of Folio 3, who will be moderating our first panel today with Junaid Bajwa. Before we get started, I wanted to introduce our team who made this all possible today. So I'll go first. My name is Farhan Yunus. I'm the General Secretary of Open Silicon Valley. So I'll ask the rest of my team if they can briefly introduce themselves.
Hello, everyone. My name is Andalib Ahmed. I'm the president of Open Silicon Valley. Very excited about our event today. It's our first digital health conference. It's virtual, so it's amazing. And looking forward to listening and hearing, learning from all these amazing speakers. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, everyone. My name is Asima Kokar. I help lead Open Silicon Valley's promotional and social media efforts. Very nice to see you all here. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Farooq Jilani, and I'm the head of media.
Hi, this is Zuhaib. I am the head of marketing. I'm the CTO and co-founder of a digital health startup based out of the Middle East. I'm very excited to be in the call, and looking forward to hearing some very exciting discussions.
All right. Thank you, Zohaib. Thank you, Andalib, Asma, and Farooq for your hard work and making this possible for us today. I'm going to share my screen today for a few additional items. So, as you know, Open Silicon Valley is a nonprofit dedicated to the promotion of entrepreneurship and professional development. If you like our webinar today, we hope you would consider joining us and maybe following us on our social media channels. We have some links here for Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. A few housekeeping items. We would recommend, if you could please everyone keep their lines on mute. If you have any questions, the way we have organized our flow today is please add those questions in the chat window. We will be continuously monitoring that, and during the Q&A time, the moderator of each session will pick up some of the questions from the chat window and present them to the panelists. We also recommend that you can raise your hand virtually, and if the moderator has some additional time, they will ask you to ask your questions live on our webinar today. Please type your location in the chat window so that we know where you're joining from. A little bit about the agenda today. We have our first session today is a fireside chat with Junaid Bajwa. Junaid is the Chief Medical Scientist at Microsoft. This chat is being moderated by Omer Khan. Once this chat is over, second agenda is on digital health devices. This panel is being moderated by Adnan Lavai. And our third session is on cost and convenience of healthcare. Once all these three sessions are over, we have arranged for breakout rooms, so you should be able to network with many of the panelists who are participating in our conference.
Farhan, I think you're on mute.
Can you hear me? Okay. So we have 6 breakout rooms. The first one, we have 6 breakout rooms, so please feel free to join any of the breakout rooms towards the end of the conference today. So with that, I will hand it over to Umair to start up our first session of the day.
Thank you so much, Farhan. If you stop sharing the screen, then I'll introduce our distinguished guest from London. There you go. Well, fantastic to see everybody here. Over 120 people, bright and early here in Silicon Valley, California, where I'm based. Assalamu alaikum. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. And especially warm welcome to our Mehman Khususi, our guest dialing in from London, England, Junaid Bajwa. Junaid, welcome.
Thank you, Amir. Assalamu alaikum. Hello, good morning, good evening to you all. Hope everybody remains safe and well.
Thank you. So Junaid, let's get into it, yaar. For those, obviously everybody is here to hear you speak, and they know that you are currently serving as Chief Medical Scientist at Microsoft Research. Before that, you were at Merck as Head of Global Alliances, and before that at NHS in the UK. So in your own words, describe kind of your journey from being sort of every Desi parent's dream, practicing physician, doctor, UK qualified, and then you took this kind of 90, 180, 270-degree turn and went into massive corporate leadership, startup advisors. So what has that journey been like?
No, you're very kind. And for anybody else, I think Umair does a great job of PR and comms. So I personally like to hire him anytime. So real honor to be here with Open SV colleagues. So my current portfolio, as Umair mentioned, is I'm the Chief Medical Scientist at Microsoft Research. I still practice a day a week within the National Health Service here in the UK as a physician. And I have the privilege of sitting on a couple of different boards. My journey here probably starts 15 years ago, and much of it has been by accident, not by design. And like a medic, I have undertaken a number of different rotations. So I had the good privilege of ended up being triple board certified across primary care, internal medicine, and general surgery. My current practice is primary care. Husband of 1, father of 2, and that has probably also guided some of the decisions I've made throughout the course of my career thus far. And most of my last 15 years have been spent across the clinical, payer, provider, regulatory, and more latterly, life sciences and big tech. So I've done my payer rotations, my management rotations. I did my life science rotation at Merck for 5 years, both in a UK subsidiary, then in a global role, and now in my big tech rotation. And I'm hoping that this is my speciality, as it were. It's an extraordinary organization to work with and work for. And I think we're really at this convergence now of biology, medicine, and technology. And the things that drive me personally are impact at scale. I love the ability to try and make a difference to the patients and public that I serve when I'm in clinic on a Friday or a Saturday. But I'm extraordinarily almost bemused by the technology that I'm able to deliver to them versus the technology I see on my Monday to Thursday and the innovations that I see. And until I can reduce that delta, I don't believe my work is done. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a flavor, Umair, of the last 15 years or so. And a lot of it has been very opportunistic, met good people along the way who've helped me, guided me, mentored me, and created opportunities. And I hope to be able to do the same for others.
Well said, thank you. So, you know, somebody like you who starts out as a physician and goes towards the corporate world, what sort of unique values does someone who is basically a medical professional, trained physician, bring to the corporate world and also to the tech startup world?
I'd love for you to ask the people around me in many regards. So the reason I think I am where I am at Microsoft is they were looking for somebody with a clinical background, a payer background, a life sciences background with an interest in technology. And there's not many of us around. I think I see a lot of companies and startups, entrepreneurs and digital companies who approach healthcare from different lenses. So some people take a very engineering approach. Others may take a entrepreneurial approach. Others will have medics in their organization, but these medics may have decided to take their exams but never specialized in anything, or they did house jobs or early residency and then moved on. I think there is something to be said around holding a patient's hand, guiding them through a treatment regime, taking the risk and taking the clinical risk and knowing how that feels, and then being able to think about how do you continually improve that? How do you improve that through technology and better use of novel medicines or novel technology in and around? And so hopefully, I am not a computer scientist, I'm not an engineer. Other people are brilliant at what they do, but I could interact with a multidisciplinary team of people to imagine what that better future could look like. And I think the future really is this multidisciplinary competencies that we need across engineering, computer science, and healthcare to tackle some of the wickedest problems that we have in society today. And we've seen how over the last year during the pandemic, the ability to have 3, if not more, vaccines now available to us is really a convergence of science, biology, and technology operating at the top of and the peak of what they can do today to try and solve massive challenges in and around us. And I hope to be able to contribute in my very small manner through some of the clinical lens and clinical stories that I can tell along the way.
Now, of course, you know, for a journey like yours, you have to prepare, as you said, professionally, but also academically. And you have about 10 degrees that you have accumulated over your very, incredible career. 3 of them, I'll let the audience know, are from Harvard. So even if you discount those 3, that's still a bunch of amazing degrees. How do folks prepare for this journey as you've taken academically, professionally? Anything specific around that that you would advise either budding entrepreneurs getting into medtech or medical professionals getting into medtech?
No, and you're very, very kind. I think some of it's opportunistic. I also have incredible imposter syndrome. And so my medical qualifications were partly because of a thirst and hunger that I had for knowledge gathering. And I didn't know if anybody would take me seriously unless I had one of these qualifications. Then as I went into the payer landscape, I decided to undertake a master's, partly because I thought, well, I read the chapter around how healthcare payers make decisions. Reading a chapter about something doesn't necessarily mean I'm suddenly accountable for 75 million pounds and I need to understand how to spend that across integrated care, mental health, business intelligence, and IT. I wanted to understand the theory behind these decisions and in an evidence-based manner then apply them. And that then led me to start thinking about other applications and other areas in which I could gain knowledge. When I joined Merck, I didn't want to be seen as the ground floor primary care physician or the medical affairs person. I wanted to understand the business of pharma and actually how do business leaders make decisions. So I decided to take an MBA. So a lot of it is probably my own vulnerability, my own imposter syndrome that has led me to try and seek knowledge wherever I can. And as a consequence of that, boosted my confidence slightly, but I very much still have massive imposter syndrome. I'm glad that people tolerate me, and I'm glad that people will engage with me in a conversation. And I'm hoping that some of these experiences can ultimately make a difference, again, for the patients and public that I serve.
Okay. So tell me a little bit now to kind of conclude your personal journey. We'll get to your digital health in a minute, but just in terms of your personal journey, you're now at Microsoft, you know, in a pretty incredible role. Tell us a little bit about that role and kind of your mandate at Microsoft and what you hope to achieve. You mentioned a little bit, but what you and Microsoft hope to achieve in the coming years.
No, it's a real honor to be part of Microsoft. So if you take Microsoft's mission around empowering everybody on the planet to achieve more with appropriate use of technology, imagine what that could mean for healthcare. So what if we could empower everyone to have better healthcare through the appropriate use of technology? My personal mandate within this and the team within which I operate and work is around the use of AI. So the exam question before us is, how do you transform the practice of medicine with human-centered artificial intelligence? Within that, there's a number of different bits. If you break that question down, to transform something, you need to understand the baseline. The practice of medicine is indeed the practice of medicine. It's the art and the science. It's the human in the loop. In my mind, how do I augment the superpowers that I believe healthcare professionals, doctors, pharmacists, nurses, and even administrators in healthcare already have, and augment them through technology, allow them all to operate at the top of their license, to reduce any redundancy, make them more efficient, and for the clinicians who spend time with patients, release time back to care. So my opportunity is to think about that across various horizons of time. So what are the opportunities that we have today within healthcare systems, pharmaceutical organizations, or otherwise? What does that horizon look like? If we solve some of the low-hanging fruit, what's the next challenge ahead of us? And even beyond that, across the next 10 years, how do we lead to a world where we're thinking about precision therapeutics, precision diagnostics, leading to a world of precision medicine, and reducing variation, increasing safety, and improving the standardization of clinical practice?
Well, that genuinely sounds amazing for society, but I do have to ask you, having worked in and led in a leadership position, big pharma, and now in a leadership position in big tech, which one is less evil?
I don't believe either one is. And I think the last year is probably testament to that. If either of them were evil, we wouldn't have the vaccines available to us today, nor would we be able to have the conversation that we're having across multiple different countries and the ability for organizations to continue to operate. So I watched The Constant Gardener. I was very curious about pharma up until the point that I joined and was able to lift under the hood and see the incredible mission and drive of people when they're trying to create breakthrough medicines to often help the most vulnerable in society. Yet they get tremendously bad press and are often less trusted than the tobacco industry. And that's really hard. Now within a big tech company, I think trust is paramount. And there are companies that hold trust very, very deeply and embody that through their DNA from the top of their leadership all the way down. And others may have a very cavalier attitude. I've been very, very fortunate with the two opportunities that I've had, both at Merck, whose mission was to think, whose mission itself says they cannot rest until a way has been found with their help to bring their finest achievements to everyone. And for a tech company like Microsoft, who wish to empower everyone to achieve more with technology. Both are just different levels of scale for me around how you can deliver on the human condition and deliver human impact. And again, I am but a very tiny cog in a huge wheel within which I hope to be able to leverage some influence so that we make the right decisions. And in my mind, the patient and the public are at the heart of everything we do, and that guides all of our decisions moving forward. And I can't imagine that being an evil mission. I can only think about that as being a force for good.
Fair point. Okay, fine. I won't press that more, but I did hear something, non-diplomatic about the tobacco industry, so I'll take that. So now comes sort of the second part of our discussion for our conversation, and we'll be opening it up to questions, in a few minutes. But digital health and sort of the future of health as digital health. Can digital innovation make healthcare more human?
Yeah, no, I believe so. So as I think about digital technologies and I think about the world around us, I think we're living an extraordinary moment, witnessing, again, as I mentioned before, this convergence of biology, technology, and medicine. So overnight, last year when the pandemic hit, I think we've seen different ways that technology has been stepped up. Some of these technologies are not new. I mean, telemedicine and video consultations is not a new thing. It took a global pandemic for that to become almost mainstream. If I fast forward 10 years from now, we know that we're going to see a massive crisis in healthcare from a workforce perspective. The World Health Organization tells us that there'll be anywhere around 14 million less healthcare professionals on the planet than what society needs. That's 14 million less doctors, nurses, and pharmacists, predominantly in low middle income countries, versus what society will need. At the same time, we'll know that we'll have an aging population with complex comorbidities. So what do I mean by that? I mean people that not only have diabetes, but they might have diabetes and heart failure and some dementia. So when you've got an increasing set of demands and you haven't got the supply on the workforce, you need technology innovation in order to enable you to both service the access, service the needs, and service that healthcare that this population will require in the future, which is where I truly believe that we're at almost a digital renaissance within which we can really start to impact on healthcare in different ways. I've seen massive transformation in the NHS. I've seen really interesting innovation happening in countries like Rwanda, in addition to countries, even in Pakistan, doing some fantastic innovation as it relates to this, and things that we should try and embrace where possible. As long as things are being done in the right way and with the appropriate regulation and in the right ethical standards, I think these are all forces for good within which digital health can truly become embraced.
But when we talk about AI and potentially even that what will happen to radiologists in the future, it'll all be machines interacting and all. You're painting a future where, if anything, the robots will actually help make healthcare more human.
Yeah, I don't believe we're eliminating any individual's role right now. I cannot think of that happening overnight. I've seen examples of where the role of the radiologist is augmented by the use of technology. So radiologists have embraced the use of different types of technology software platforms to make them more efficient, make it easier for them to do their work, reduce the variation, and almost encourage them to even be better at their job if there's a parallel digital nudge happening saying, did you miss this or did you see this? If we're screening thousands and thousands of people for lung cancer, do we want the radiologist to see every one of those? Or do we want to identify the ones that might be higher risk categories and then bring them forward? The same could be said for pathology. So I imagine this world where there is the human in the loop. And I can't imagine a world where we're completely eliminating any of these specialities. I think the world will evolve and the speciality will evolve. I cannot see that we're eliminating it completely.
Good. So when it comes to technology, intersecting with healthcare and medicine, give me an example or sort of just, in your opinion, what fascinates you the most? What are sort of the most compelling either digital health applications that you've seen out there, right? Or trends that you see?
So maybe I could talk about some things that are not Star Trek-y right now, so things that are available to us today, and then maybe also imagine what this future could look like. So maybe just two examples. So one, if we extend the radiology story, there's an open source toolkit called InnerEye, which is from Microsoft, that was released towards the later part of last year, so around December time. It's a 10-year project. It's an open source AI toolkit that grew out of a technology that came from Xbox Connect. And the idea for this was to say, what if we could make contouring more effective and more accurate and more automated? And contouring specifically in the radiotherapy sector. So radiotherapy is a treatment option for people with cancer. Typically, the process by which you target the tumor with radiotherapy can take anywhere between 30 minutes to 3 hours. This team has found that if you're able to deploy this toolkit in certain academic hospitals, you can reduce that down to maybe 5 to 10 minutes. So if you can reduce it down to 5 to 10 minutes, imagine how many more people can have targeted radiotherapy treatment. Imagine how many more people can go through and have the treatment they need. And when we're thinking about the post-pandemic phase, there'll be a huge unmet need that we have to target, especially for people with cancer, massive waiting list that will need to be managed. And you can imagine a technology such as this could have a significant impact, both on the academic side, and people could apply this to slide pathology, digital pathology, other tumors, other use cases. And over time it can grow, and it's completely free. And it's an open source toolkit, which allows others to build upon it for the future. So this notion of, I think, democratizing what AI is to make it less scary for people, and also enabling them with tools in their own hands to imagine what they would choose to do with it, I think is really quite special. The other one I thought that is super interesting, again, available today, is when you or I go and see our physicians, and or indeed when I'm practicing, there is this barrier between me and the patient, the computer screen within which I'm typing everything as they chat. So in my 10-minute consultations of 42 patients a day, I not only have to understand your unmet need, Omer, when you come into my clinic, I need to document everything, I need to refer everything, and I need to make sure that I never make a mistake. What if the conversation that you and I had was automatically coded in the back end for the purposes of reimbursement and for quality improvement? What if I could just order the tests through voice and I wouldn't have to tick everything down? Could that improve the relationship that you and I have in that moment of trust without the need for this interface between us called a computer? And could it ambiently measure your the conversation that we're having? And could it ambiently then potentially in the future have some sensors around you so that we don't even need the peripherals? Maybe I could check your heart rate, pulse rate, respiratory rate in advance. And this ambient technology, I think, is emerging. If we fast forward a little bit, I'd say that we're aiming for a journey towards precision medicine, which will be enabled by precision therapeutics and precision diagnostics. And each of the examples are probably an example of a precision diagnostic. Precision therapeutics is really the transformation and disruption that pharma companies are going through. So how do I create that precision medicine for you, specifically for you and the challenges that you have based on your medical and socio-demographic status? And these are huge opportunities for us to start thinking about in a different way.
Fantastic. So I'm going to start to open it up for questions from the audience. Obviously, the distinguished speakers in the conference can unmute themselves also. So, but I'd request them to also just put in a line in the chat, and I can call on them. I can call on folks in the chat. I'll just have one final question in this section for you, Junaid. So the industry leaders, I think, in the audience would love to kind of see, you've been obviously with Merck, you're now at Microsoft, these are huge organizations, and you obviously are yourself an innovator, you're part obviously a Mentors Fund, you're on advisory board for, sort of high growth companies and startups. How do big companies promote a culture of innovation, right? So changing gears a little from health tech towards just innovation, entrepreneurship, and the lessons you've learned. How would you advise folks in the audience who are part of bigger organizations and growing organizations to promote a culture of innovation?
Yeah, so I think it starts with the individual, and ideally it should start from anywhere in the organization, but it really needs to start from the top of the organization in my mind. So both organizations that I've been part of are both science and innovation organizations at their core. But if you look at the academics kind of side of this, there's a great corporate life cycle by Adizes, who I'm not sure if everybody's looked up, but I'd definitely look it up if you've never seen it before, which essentially says a startup company does really, really good, and it's almost like a child. So it's in its adolescence phase, it's super excited, it's doing all the right things, it starts to grow, but as it grows, it starts to almost oversell itself, and it reaches the point of aristocracy. After it reaches that point of aristocracy, it starts to get very, very bureaucratic in that organization until it goes down a very, very slow death. And the organizations that just stay in the bureaucracy are very challenged on the innovation cycle. They have to innovate and reinvent themselves all the time to stay ahead of the curve, to hit shareholder value and shareholder expectations. The thing that excites people is that innovation curve, but it's also quite exhausting to constantly innovate, constantly create new businesses, and constantly think through the next big horizon. And they also have to learn and have to have as many failures as they have successes. And as they increase their bureaucracy, they're probably not as great as learning through their failures as they necessarily need to be. So in essence, each organization, I believe, needs to be a learning organization. And they need to think about not just the internal transformation and innovation, but the external ecosystem in which they operate, and really understand not just what's happening in their own house, but what's happening down the street in the next city within which they're operating in order for them to constantly strive. And I think that's really, really hard. I've been fortunate, both organizations have huge innovation agendas, but the bureaucracy is also the silos within silos and divisions in which they operate. So some groups are more likely to be more innovative than others, and the R&D functions are likely to be trying to drive that innovation culture. Your follow-on question might naturally be, how does a entrepreneur or a tech startup individual engage with a large corporate? And if I may, Omer, maybe just follow on from you from that one.
Sure.
I think that's probably one of my lessons learned, which is understand your stakeholders, understand the snake pit within which you're walking into, and only engage with that corporate if you can sign up an executive sponsor at the highest level in the organization who's going to pull you through. Make sure that whatever problem you're solving is aligned with a business strategy and a business need of relevance for that sponsor and for that organization, and understand why you need to work with that corporate. It has to be, in healthcare, a triple win in my mind. It has to be a win for the patient, it has to be a win for the partner organization, which can be startup or big tech corporate, and then it has to be a win for whoever else that stakeholder might be. But having that executive sponsorship is absolutely key, and understanding where that sponsor lives within that organization is absolutely key. Otherwise, you can spend a long time having conversations with people who are not going to pull you through, and you're just hemorrhaging opportunity cost along the way.
Yeah, brilliantly put. But what's also interesting is that I think that connection with startups kind of gets that innovation gene pool in, right? So presumably the sort of the more far-sighted executives and leaders would encourage those and foster those connections between startups and their sort of big companies.
Yeah, no, and I have firsthand experience of when we set up a prevention-focused digital accelerator in the UK with Merck and a large telco, and we had exactly this. We had the CEO come from Merck to the UK, and it was quite a different vibe and a different experience, and it takes time. But I had the sponsorship of the managing director for the UK, and then ultimately senior leaders across the organization to make it happen. But we needed that at the time because digital plus pharma didn't really make sense based on our reputation. So we needed something else to think through what would really make us relevant for startups. And that startup could be a talent pool, it could be an innovation pool, it could be a partner pool, it could be another way to think through access. But having an understanding that entire value ecosystem that the two could have together is really, really quite a special thing to try and cultivate.
Yeah. Okay, so we go to questions now. I know Reshma has a question around precision medicine. Reshma, welcome to this conversation. There are other folks also asking about precision medicine. So if you want, just feel free to ask your question of Dr. Bajwa.
Hey, Assalamu alaikum. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Umer, for allowing me to ask the question. I actually posted that I've been an 11-year caretaker for a cancer patient. My late husband suffered from lung cancer. He was, by the way, also a Microsoft employee for 15 years. Actually, he was at Microsoft and he was diagnosed with cancer. So big thanks to the company and corporate caretaking of a cancer patient throughout his treatment in the early days. My question was, as a caretaker for 11 years, I actually am, I don't have a science background. I have a finance background, but as a caretaker, I find there's a big gap between the patient caretaker and the oncologist or anyone who's taking care of the patients. And I see that gap widening because there is a disconnect when it comes to precision medicine of a patient while they're going through treatments such as drug trials or immunotherapy and whatnot. And as a caretaker of my husband in the Silicon Valley, I've gone through all the procedures involving the drug trials, new innovation, the tools that doctors are using, what you just mentioned about having a computer and having a second person record the conditions. I do find that there is a lot of scope if technology could be incorporated in the caretaking part, where a daily intake of the patient's reactions to medicine are recorded. As a mom of physicians, I have 4 kids who are doctors now. I'm actually very interested in seeing how I can encourage kids to take on more technology and innovation while they're pursuing the journey of medicine to residencies. And I feel like there's a lot of gap between the technology and healthcare. And how do you propose companies like Microsoft or any other company that's undertaking these initiatives can lessen the gap, maybe having a separate arm for doctors to be continuously upgraded on what the technology is, so that the patients who are at the verge of
I think we get the gist of the question. We have like 15 questions waiting. Sorry, yeah. I will have to.
No, I just wanted to clarify that. Hopefully, you can able to address that.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks, Reshma.
So Reshma, thank you so much for sharing that story, and you hit something that is very, very close to my heart. So I was, in some regards, a carer for my late Khala who died of ovarian cancer. And I also saw firsthand some of the challenges. And I think Umer's question earlier around what can a doctor bring to some of these conversations is as important as what can a caregiver bring to some of these conversations. And in my mind, the patient journey is absolutely continuous. It doesn't start and stop when someone's in a clinic, out of a clinic, when they're having their chemo, when they're not having their chemo. It's those moments in between when it's the middle of the night, there's a reaction and you don't know whether you're supposed to go to the ER or not. And you're afraid because actually the white cell count might be low and you don't want to get infected by anything else. I mean, those are difficult decisions. And there's a ton of research that suggests to us that if you were able to empower patients and their caregivers and do something as simple as advise them on side effects, but give them a tracker for their side effects early on in their treatment. And so in between treatment cycles, if we just take that phase of the patient journey, improve upon that, we can absolutely improve patient outcomes. So I am thinking about, what if you could have as simple things as having a sensor on your watch, which measures your pulse rate, your activity, and it maybe does a check-in with you every day. What could that do? And there's a really interesting startup based out of the UK that you might want to check out that has been set up by a caregiver called Careology that is doing exactly this. I think a lot of these innovations may come up from the startup ecosystem, and it's up to companies like us to think about how could we enable the scale for these things and also engage them into a care pathway of sorts. The other company that you might want to have a look at that is not looking at it in cancer, but looking at it in pre-op and post-operative care is a company called Day to Day. MIT spin out, nod to Amer, now scaling in India, but these types of companies are also doing fantastic things, all based on caregiver experience. I absolutely agree with everything you've said. It needs to be done.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Reshma. We have enough questions to fill out the next 3 hours, so I'm going to go through it somewhat quickly and in roughly the order that I'm getting them. And Junaid, you can see these questions here as well. So the one thing that I find interesting, like what Saeed Arshad is asking, that you can see, how do you see tech helping out in preventative medicine versus sort of the technology which is at later stage care, right, when the patient is already sick and getting sicker?
Yeah, so we that led me to find, I guess, Europe's first prevention-focused accelerator back in 2016, to think through actually what are the types of wellness prevention things that we need, because it's not just about sick care. We need to figure out how do you do healthcare in a better way. And so some examples of that could be a company that we invested in called Quit Genius a couple of years back that is focusing on smoking cessation, but also alcohol addiction and substance misuse. That is absolutely looking at, if you can solve that, what are the downstream consequences of smoking? Lung cancer being one amongst others. And also, if you think about that in the context of COVID, what more could you do? So I absolutely think that it's a huge space, and the whole wellness digital health space is probably the one that will create the permission for us to do even more on the targeted precision medicine space in the future, as society gets more used to being the quantified self, understanding themselves, understanding what works. My caution would be, we're very good at creating these prevention-based solutions for the English-speaking world. We absolutely need to do more for the non-English speaking world as well, and ensure that we're not creating a digital divide, but somehow creating digital democratization through the use of this technology.
Excellent. Afzal is asking, digital health seems to address access and efficiency at scale, right? I mean, that's what digital health helps bring, is access at scale. But can it address quality, right? Expertise and experience at scale. So given the complexity of diagnosis, for example, in oncology.
I think it certainly has the potential. If you ever work inside a hospital, quality improvement can often be quite a tricky thing, and it's organization by organization, institution by institution. We probably have a lot to learn from the manufacturing sector and almost the notion of Industry 4.0 for the purposes of healthcare, by which you begin to drive quality improvement and continuous PDSA cycles, so plan, do, study, act cycles, throughout everything that we do to continue to minimize risk. It's as much about teaching medical students early on around quality improvement, risk management through the use of technology as it is when they become more senior, more mature in their careers. But I absolutely see a role that technology can play.
Good. We have a question from Shirzai. You've raised your hand. Feel free to unmute and ask a question of Junaid.
Thank you so much. Amazing talk. This is completely in line with what my wife and I have been doing for the last 15 years. The talk about imposter syndrome, all those, they say you have more degrees than a thermostat, but it's always been chasing this thing to try to prove to myself and that, there's something that I can do more to achieve to get to that point. So both of us actually got into this journey with our grandparents who had Alzheimer's. And the same pathway, diagnose, and sadly as it is in neuro, diagnose and adios, and you don't do anything. And so we took a path less traveled, she from Columbia University, me from NIH. We went through a preventive search, and we then got into the technology realm, created an app, created an environment in the communities. So at the interface of community-based participatory research and technology, CBPR and technology, we've created this movement that I'm going to self-promote here. Our book just today was picked as a Wall Street Journal bestseller. So that's an amazing feat that we, but the point is,
congratulations.
Like, how do you diagnose early, which is extremely important, because if you diagnose cognitive decline early, which is the most prevalent, fastest growing epidemic that's not even diagnosed, it's not part of ICD-10 or anything. If you can diagnose it early, 90% or more can be prevented. That's the key. So diagnosis, and right now we have blunt tools. We have an app that's somewhat blunt, and we're trying to translate it into the environment, living environment, catching changes in executive function, motor, and all of that stuff, which would be more effective than 1,000 doctors put together over a year. And I think in the next 5 years, we will, not necessarily us, but we will achieve that point, and that will change the world of cognitive health profoundly. So we're very excited about this, and we wanted to kind of find out if, okay, I've done the executive leadership at Harvard, which I'd learned nothing, and in all of these things. How does somebody from my background, which is hungry to translate this early detection and change, lifestyle change, to populations, which we're doing? We have the largest brain health initiative in the country. How do we do that in a way where it transitions much bigger? And I'll be very humble, this is not false humility, pure. That's been the biggest, most daunting thing for somebody like me and my wife, try to figure out how do you scale up, because we know what it takes. It takes connecting to the people in their.
What do you think? How can you help Sherzai and his team think through this? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's probably a longer conversation from what I gather, Sherzai. But I suppose two immediate thoughts. One is mental health, cognitive health is extremely difficult. There isn't a blood test that says, hey, you've got a mental health problem or a cognitive decline issue. It's the medical features, your genetic features, your environmental features, your social determinants of health, all wrapped up in one. Plus, what are the acoustics and the sound and your affect? What is it? How do you turn up? What is it? What's happening inside your brain? Essentially, it's a multimodal, multi-dimensional view that you need in order to pick it up. And it's also stigmatized heavily across different societies, different cultures, and otherwise. People would rather not know that they have this. If I take mental health more broadly, I think we saw last year through both the pandemic and also the Black Lives Matter movement, how much of an issue this is in the US, but also how much of an issue it is across the world. And the US may not necessarily be the best place that I would go to do a lot of the research. You might want to think about the research that's happening in the UK in and around this, the National Dementia Institute, and indeed maybe look at and partner with maybe some pharma companies such as Lilly and others who are operating in this space. But very happy to pick up something off with you offline and think about a deeper way to help you problem solve this. It's a difficult problem, but it's a great one to solve.
Thank you so much. We'll talk. Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Junaid. That's brilliant. And thank you, Junaid. Actually, very interesting question, Junaid, from Dr. Adil Akhtar, who's a medical oncologist. He's saying that you're talking about, obviously, the global pandemic, and then there's this parallel misinformation pandemic, infodemic going on. What do you think is the role of big tech in fighting misinformation? And all I can say in the context of this question is I'm glad you're chief medical scientist at Microsoft and not at Facebook.
I think you answered your question in your comment. So I mean, we've seen this play out, haven't we, in not only the pandemic, but this whole topic of fake news. I think over the last year, if not longer. So rather than getting political and throwing mud, I think there is something about how every organization has a responsibility around the work that they do, the information they spread, and how they do their work, and what they tolerate and what they don't. So many companies probably have a lot to answer for. I think it's really hard. Like my mum will get a lot of, and my dad will get a ton of information on WhatsApp, and they'll forward it to me, and I will suggest to them that I don't think they should forward any of this thing on to any of their friends and family because I think it's garbage. And I'm the filter and I'm the triage. But I mean, WhatsApp probably has a lot to answer for, even as I think about what we've had to manage here in the UK around our own communities, especially from the Black and African and Asian and minority ethnic populations, around their reluctance and resistance to getting the vaccine. People having concerns about fertility, or people having concerns about a chip being inserted inside the vaccine that somebody's going to have control over them for. But these are real worries that people have. And then not understanding, of course, also that after they've been vaccinated, they haven't got superpowers. They still need to maintain social distancing, wear a mask, have public hygiene measures. So we've done a lot here in the UK to try and engage the community through multiple platforms. So almost flip it and use them as a force for good. But it's both the opportunity and the challenge. And each organization, each individual probably has a responsibility around the messages that they're sharing.
Jennifer Ernst, welcome. And I know you have a question of Junaid. Feel free to unmute and ask the question.
Hi, I came from tech into the healthcare space about 4 years ago. And as an entrepreneur traversing what is a very complex landscape, I was curious about your opinions about how to make meaningful impact when you have so many different stakeholders from the healthcare system, the physicians, the different types of physicians in the systems, and the many layers to really penetrate to bring a solution to the patient population that are actually suffering.
It's a fantastic question. And so the NHS is probably, I can't remember which one it is now, either the 4th or the 5th largest organization in the world. And I often joke that I had the privilege of working for that, and then I had the privilege of working for the 4th largest pharma company in the world. I couldn't have done anything at Merck if I had not done anything in the NHS, and I couldn't do anything at Microsoft had I not understood how Merck works or how the NHS works. And so I suppose if there was like a silver bullet answer to this, Jennifer, I would say one is be super specific around the problem you're trying to solve and who you're solving it for and where you wish to deliver impact for what bit of that patient pathway. If you can map out a patient pathway in and around the challenge and understand that entire pathway from pre-disease state all the way to end of life, and understand every single pain point that you think you're going to address along that, then look at it from 3 dimensions. Look at it from the patient perspective first and foremost, and or their caregiver. Then look at it from the clinical perspective, and then you have to overlay that with the regulatory perspective and the payer perspective. And you almost have to live those 4 dimensions out to then understand who you navigate and where you get that executive sponsorship for in the US-based healthcare institution, payer, provider, regulator, or the UK in order to get it done. But it is a heavy lift. I remember doing a project 4 years ago that it was strategically the right thing to do for the NHS. I had a partnership across Verily, so Google Life Sciences, Merck, and the NHS at the most senior level. But to do the right thing, I still had to navigate 42 providers, 6 regulators, and 3 payers to do something in one national health service. And so if you're not ready for that, it's really, really hard. And that's part of the challenge around scale in healthcare and for technology companies to scale in healthcare too.
Thank you.
Well, there's a whole bunch of questions and we have like 3 minutes, and I'm happy to go on chatting with you, Junaid, for a few hours, but it is evening at your end, and besides Farhan and Adli will kill me. So I'm gonna take a couple of final questions here. My apologies that all the questions haven't, sort of cannot be addressed. It's a fascinating conversation. Dr. Lubna Saudagar is asking, when you talk about AI, and this is a real fear, that in developing countries, for example, like in India, wouldn't it worsen the unemployment status in these countries? And I think you mentioned a little bit, but very briefly, is there something you can say that's, encouraging in that respect?
It's probably a case by case, but I haven't found any case where I think that to be the case. I think it'll change the way that medicine is practiced. And I would argue that if I look at some parts of India, or indeed Pakistan or Bangladesh, there's a reason why people try and seek healthcare not in those countries and try and seek it elsewhere. And what we want to be able to do is try and democratize and improve it. So the same quality of care that you receive in a, I don't know, a Mass General, why can't you have that in downtown city X in Pakistan, India, or Bangladesh? Why can't we have that? So whatever we can do to improve quality at the same time as reducing inequality is probably what we should try and aspire to do.
Okay, and just very quickly, folks are asking about your role in Microsoft. There's a startup, lots of startups saying, how do we join? How do we work with startups, with Microsoft and with you? And broadly around that, Fahad, there's a question about, sort of your ambitions to impact. IBM's recent, Watson Health experience is presumably a cautionary tale of sort of, big tech entering, big healthcare. So just, we'll end out this discussion with kind of how you see Microsoft kind of doing this and not being just another cautionary tale, and how do you, how can startups work with you in your journey and mission?
So on the startup piece, we have a MS for Startups program that anybody can apply for and join. It's global. We have different groups in Africa, different groups in Asia, different groups in the Middle East, a ton of different groups in Europe, and a ton of different groups in the US. And that is an entry point into the Microsoft ecosystem. In terms of the things that I look for in particular, I look at those things that are going to be absolutely game-changing for the practice of medicine and are going to transform the ability for us to make impact at a global scale across billions of lives. And I'll have a high bar in terms of those things that are, say, Microsoft research ready. That doesn't mean that they may not be ready for MS for Startups or for other parts of Microsoft. So if in doubt, reach out, connect. If I can try and guide, navigate, support, or signpost, I will do my absolute level best to do so. But it's a large, complex organization, as are some of the others. And I think we should learn and have cautionary tales. There's cautionary tales inside Microsoft around things that could have been done better historically. And I'm always asking that question around what have we learned from the last 10 years and what would we do differently, knowing what we know now. But we absolutely must learn from the ecosystem collective, because down the road, we're all in it together, be that the Google, the IBM, the Amazon, the startups, the Facebooks, what have you. Healthcare is important, in my mind, for society overall. It's not a competition who gets there first. The competition is how do we globally improve health. And I think we've seen, again, pandemic has taught us a lot of lessons around how companies have collaborated. The question in my mind is how much of that can we take forward and how much of that can we use in order to really benefit humanity and mankind.
Well, with that drop mic moment of his speech, I have to end this conversation. Junaid, brilliant as always. Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. Wish you the very best with everything you're doing at Microsoft and the rest of your journeys and hats. Farhan, over to you.
Thank you so much, Omer, and thank you so much, Junaid. Fascinating discussion. I think I personally learned a lot of some amazing questions. I got a cup of tea before the webinar started, and I didn't even get a chance to touch it. So I absolutely loved your thoughts. And Omer, thank you so much for moderating. As usual, you have been a mentor to me as well, and to a lot of startups in the Bay Area. For those who are joining us just recently, Omer is the chairman of Folio 3. He's the founding partner of Mentors Fund. He's also a visiting professor at UC Berkeley. And he, over the years I have been in the Bay Area, I have seen Omer mentor a lot of startups, help them grow, scale, and he's always a beacon of light for a lot of us here at Open Silicon Valley. So thank you, Omer, for the chat. And thank you, Junaid, for joining us. And we'll look forward to having you again in our annual forum. And I'm sure many people here who have some unasked questions would love to sit down and have a more in-depth conversation. So we truly appreciate your time and energy, Junaid, for being with us today. Thank you. So with that, I see we are almost, it's time for our next session. Before we go to our next session, I'm just gonna do a small poll just to make it a little bit interesting and see how much we are watching the news today and learning from the healthcare sector of the US. So I'm just going to launch a poll, and please feel free. We have about, I'll give everyone about 15 seconds to answer the questions, and then we'll close the poll. All right, so thank you so much for participating in our polls today. I think for the answer to the first question is 3.8 trillion. That's how much the US spent in 2019 on healthcare. For the second question, 1895 is the correct answer. This was discovered by a German scientists. And then the rest is all history. It's one of the biggest innovations of our times. And everybody surely has benefited from X-rays one way or the other. So moving on to our second session, which is on digital healthcare devices. Our second session is actually being moderated by Adnan Lavai. Adnan is the founder and CEO of Folio 3. He's also the founding partner at Mentors Fund, and Adnan is also a charter member of Open Silicon Valley. So I will hand it over to you, Adnan, to take it from here.
Thank you so much, Farhan. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you, everybody, for attending bright and early here in Silicon Valley and wherever else you may be. So good afternoon, good evening for those of you who are in different time zones. We really appreciate you taking out some time and being here with us. I have a really exciting panel today. It's a very diverse panel. We've named it Digital Healthcare Devices, but as you will see, there are personal healthcare devices, there are devices that are being used in the hospital, and then there is one company which is completely app-based, which does not currently have devices at all. It's in the mental health field. So a very diverse panel, and I'm looking forward to their introduction to their business, to themselves, and to the revolutions that they are in the process of bringing into our lives in the next few years. So I'd like to introduce and welcome my panel. I'll start there. So the format, just quickly, is we'll go through 2-minute introductions. I have 5 panelists. They'll give an introduction to their business. We'll have a panel discussion for about 20 minutes. And then as with the rest of these, the last 10 to 20 minutes, we'll have some questions from the audience. So please, as you're listening, think of the questions that you'd like to ask the panelists, and we'd love to have a stimulating discussion towards the end. So let me introduce my panel. I have some great folks here. So we'll start with, I'll just sort of talk about the companies and then ask them to introduce themselves. So we have Jennifer Ernst from Civic Health. Civic Health does microcurrent devices for the treatment of things like sinus pain. Spring is in the air. Some of us are dealing with that issue, and Jennifer's got a solution for that. We also have Khan Siddiqui, who has a portable MRI solution, significantly decreasing the cost and increasing the convenience of MRI diagnostics. So he'll tell us a little bit about his company. We have Satya Elumalai from ADAR Labs, and he has a device that addresses some of the problems that were being talked about in Junaid's fireside chat. Just being able to understand exactly where a patient is in terms of their vitals and being able to take the right actions as a result of that. he has a device that helps us do that. And then we have Smithy Zanevald, who's using an application of 3D printing to dramatically increase the outcomes for surgery. So this is a big, a problem in the medical, in the surgical field. There are lots of mistakes. There are challenging surgeries that happen, and she's got a way. Her company has a way of making that a lot safer, a lot faster, a lot more convenient. So some really, really exciting folks here on the panel, and some really exciting companies. I'd like to open it up with Jennifer. Jennifer, please go through and tell us a little bit about yourself and your company.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Jennifer Ernst, the CEO of Civic Health. And as you heard me ask in just the question on the last session, I actually came from a tech background. So I had about 20 years at Xerox PARC, started a company coming out of that in a partnership with a Norwegian-based company, developing new ways to print electronics. And most recently, about 4 years, I came across an invention that took me into one of the most exciting new areas of medicine called bioelectronic medicine. So our product, formed the company 4 years ago, and we had product in market in about 3 years. This is a neuromodulation or a stimulation device that uses a small amount of microcurrent applied on the skin area over the sinus passages. It is FDA cleared for relief of sinus pain here in the US, for pain, pressure, and congestion overseas. And actually, as of just slightly over a couple weeks ago, the FDA has now approved this for treatment of congestion of any form or shape in the US. So there's a whole lot of learning to talk about simply in navigating the regulatory environment. The second piece, though, is we are unique in, when we talk about a digital company, we're a little bit of a different take. This device is delivering a signal through the skin that is managing the electrical responses of the body in the sinus area. And this is a field that ranges from people who are currently putting implants on vagus nerves. They're going deep inside the nerve structure and putting clamps on devices to deliver impulses, through to the most recent generation of technologies really focused on going through the skin and doing non-invasive techniques. If you think about what decoding genomics meant to medicine, we are really at the cusp of decoding the electrical component of the body, the electrical signaling. So my background in network experiences, really, I got incredibly excited the more I'm into the research side and really understanding the depth of what's possible by manipulating, thinking of the body as an electrochemical system and looking at all the different ways we can manipulate the electrical side of the system and replace pharmaceuticals. The exciting thing, the really exciting thing from an investor standpoint is that while a pharmaceutical product on average takes about 2.2 billion to bring to market to get through an FDA clearance, products in this category, therapeutic products, are getting through regulatory clearances on less than $100 million regularly. And in fact, we got through our clearances on 5 million. So there really is a significant safety benefit and some new opportunities in an emerging space of medicine that you might not have yet heard much about, but it's certainly a space to be watching. And I think from a digital health and an AI perspective, there is a huge amount of impact to be had there.
Thank you, Jennifer. Let's go to Dr. Khan Siddiqui, who's dealing with things inside the hospital. So Khan, please give us a little bit of your background and your company and product.
Sure, great to be here, Adnan. Assalamu alaikum, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. It's great to hear Junaid start the discussion. I'm a radiologist, practiced for a decade, was a professor at Johns Hopkins, then moved to industry, did a bunch of startups, and eventually I also landed at Microsoft. So I had the similar low role that Junaid had from 2008, 2012, and actually one of the people who started the NRI project Junaid talked about. So it's great to see another Muslim Desi leading that initiative. So crazy stories from early days, just convincing MSR to even start that project was really, really hard. but amazing to see that come out. I've been in AI and medical imaging for a very long time, started very early in 2004-5 timeframe, did some of the early work in academia and then at Microsoft in that space. Bunch of other startups. After that, about 2 years ago, I joined Hyperfine as a chief medical officer and chief strategy officer to build the world's first FDA cleared portable MRI scanner that can go to the patient's bedside. It was a very daunting task and very challenging technology to go figure out and make it possible. We got it through FDA in August of last year and have been commercially scaling since then. I think I'm going to leave it at that, but you can look up a lot of the stuff about it at hyperfine.io and what kind of technology innovation we had to do to make it possible. So we're in the process of scaling the company significantly.
Thank you, Khan. Let me go next to Dr. Smithy Zanevald, who's revolutionizing the field of surgery. Tell us a little bit about your company and background. You're on mute, Smithy.
Thanks, Adnan. Thanks, Open and Folio and Mentors Fund for having me today. I'm Dr. Smithy Zanevald. I started Lazarus 3D out of my kitchen while I was a PhD student studying genetics in the Texas Medical Center, the world's largest medical center. And the reason that we founded this company is to serve one mission. And the mission is to make surgery safer and a safer healthcare and a better healthcare for all of us. The problem that we identified early on is that surgeons don't or actually cannot practice their surgeries ahead of time, right? That's impossible. So, and because of that, they don't have an opportunity to perfect their surgical plan, and they're learning on the go when they're in the operative room. And of course, everyone's doing their best, but it would be better what if they could practice or rehearse that exact surgery before they operated on their patient? So that's the technology that we bring to life today. We have multiple patents on this process, and essentially the technology allows us to take radiology data, so CTs or MRIs, from the patients directly and convert that into a digital twin. From there, we can create a physical, actual copy, a physical replica of that individual's organ, a brain, a kidney, a heart, with their conditions. And these are in soft tissue mimicking materials. So not only can it serve for patient education and for surgical planning, but it introduces a new concept in surgery, and that's called surgical rehearsals. So within 24 hours, we're able to provide these models to the surgeons, and they can rehearse and perfect their plans before they operate. Thank you so much.
Adnan, you're on mute.
Okay, thank you, Smithy. I'll go next to Dean Sherzai. Dean, tell us a little bit more about your book that came out, your methodology, and how you're taking a particular aspect of mental health, cognitive health, and addressing it using your app-based methodology.
I'm not going to take too much of your time about the book, but here's the book. We're kind of proud of it. 30-day Alzheimer's solution. It's a cool thing, another thing in the resume, I guess. But we are interested in cognition. Cognition, as we heard earlier, is a complex concept. It's at the end of the day, that's who we are, right? It's our brains and our capacity, and it's not a static phenomenon. After the age of 20, here's the bad news. If you live a certain way, it's on a decline, rapid decline. And if you live a different way, you can actually maintain and grow. That's not me giving a talk. It's a reality. It's been confirmed because the brain is an adaptive organ, powerful organ. Up to now, the only thing we've done is at the point of disease, stroke. My wife is a stroke specialist, dementia, where I worked in. Once the person develops it, okay, you have dementia, and you can't drive anymore. You have to worry about the nursing home, and that's been an incredibly devastating thing to see and grow. And it's #1 cause of mortality and morbidity in the UK, in Japan, and most of Europe, and #3 in the US, and it's growing. What we were saying 10 years ago, which is it's preventive, was controversial. Now it's not. Alzheimer's Association, ANC, everybody else is saying that it is preventable. The numbers vary, 50% up to 80% to 90%. But reality is it's a lifestyle thing. And even there, people are approaching it at the clinical level, which is a failure over and over again. It has to be at the point of where people are, and it can't be prescriptive. It has to be individually inclusive, meaning each person picks their next step. So with that in mind, because we've been working on that human aspect of it for more than 10 years, we came up with this app with the NeuroPlan, which is a blunt mechanism that's evolving. We're capturing data on a regular basis and giving people their own personalized plan one step ahead of where they need to be. Not a complete step, because that's always a failure. That's a New Year resolution concept that always fails, but one step forward. And the next step would be to capture data in a passive way and then to introduce change in a passive, systematic way, which changes habits passively. That's the critical thing. 99% of who we are is habits. Even our political beliefs are habits. And believe it or not, most of your habits are developed in your teenage years. And I say, really, you want to be stuck with your teenage habits? We have a couple of teenagers. They're good kids, but they're still teenagers. We want to adapt habits in a very systematic, non-painful way. And that's the goal of what we're trying to do with this app, which will become adaptive over time to people's environments. On the other end, we're actually doing multiple major research projects in the community. So we're putting this app in the communities. In fact, this app is the only validated app in a research project in the world. So it's going to be applied in the communities as they change. So that's what we're doing, and we're hoping to scale it up. And you heard, despite all that we are doing, this imposter syndrome and the growth curve is always a challenge to everybody. I know that. So that's where we are.
Thank you so much, Dean, for that introduction. I'll go next to Satya from ADAR. Satya, please give us an introduction to your device. Maybe you can even show us a demo, and let us know how it helps monitor disease and health. Satya, you're on mute.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it was not letting me to unmute. Again, thanks for the opportunity. I'm Satya Elumalai. I'm the founder and CEO of ADAR Health. It's a digital medicine company where we aim to reimagine today's standard for clinical trials, chronic care management, and aging in place. I started this company to help my mom, and then I worked at Johns Hopkins for over 10 years on patient safety and satisfaction, infection control, worked with multinational companies, and then managed multiple healthcare products. But I had a personal need, and it was a challenge as a caregiver to manage my mom. So that's why at ADAR, our mission is to improve the quality of life of our members with chronic condition and their caregivers and enable a positive outcome. So as a part of our solution, we built a single integrated device called MountLab. This is a handheld device, the world's first FDA-approved, CE mark cleared, non-invasive rapid health assessment device. So today the device measures 10 different health parameters: your temperature, blood pressure, ECG, oxygen saturation, pulse rate, breathing rate, respiratory pattern, heart rate variability, lung functions, and many more through a simple process. The user holds the device, place it in the mouth, and breathe through normally for 30 seconds. At the end of 30 seconds, they perform spirometry, a lung function test, where they inhale and exhale. Once they're done with the process, they can treat this like a toothbrush, wash it, and put it back into a charging base that comes with that. So basically, the device also is connected via 4G. It has its own chip in it, an IoT kit there, and we also use Bluetooth if required, to our secure HIPAA compliant cloud, where we have proprietary clinically validated algorithms to actually help generate actionable data and key health insights to identify patterns of onset, disease onset, progression, and recovery. And the data is actually sent in real time to a patient or caregiver's phone, and also to a physician through their trial managed dashboard. So I think a lot of companies are doing it through wearable devices, but for us, imagine the potential. Like, we can look at 10 to 15 health parameters at the same time. It's like measuring the performance of somebody's health or body at the same time. So a person like my mom, she just need to know if it's like red, green, yellow, or some to really understand if it's good or bad. But for a person like me or my sister, who's a really close caregiver, she can get some real-time feedback. And ultimately, the doctor is there to get inputs into how the person is doing. So today, I am able to really help my mom to monitor her health. And what we really ultimately want to do is to design and develop evidence-based therapeutic intervention for various life-threatening conditions. And as you may know, like there's a lot of digital health technologies and apps that are there. In this crowded market, the hardware is our moat, and we wanted to empower consumers to take better control of their health. I'll be happy to talk a little bit more during the panel, but thanks for the opportunity again.
Thank you, Satya. So let me go through a few questions here. All of you panelists are at various stages of introducing your product. I think most of you have your product out there and you're kind of in the scaling type of phase. What was the toughest part of bringing your product to market? Was it FDA approval? Was it finding product market fit? Was it, customer, acceptance? Tell us a little bit more about that. Satya, maybe we can get started with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for us, it's the FDA clearance, right? I think when you say like a device can do so many things, it often comes with excitement as well as skepticism if this really works and if it has any value for the users. So one end is understanding and getting the regulatory clearance, which is amazing. We just got all our clearances earlier this year. But the other side is, why should I measure all these different parameters? And oftentimes people come and ask me, hey, I just have hypertension. Can I just get a blood pressure cuff or blood pressure as a part of your solution? But I think polychronic condition is a new normal. A lot of people go through a lot of other conditions and oftentimes delay understanding these things. That's where measuring a lot of things that we measure through our device would be phenomenal in terms of predicting some of the conditions that they can get through. Today, my mom, she all of a sudden has been diagnosed with chronic kidney disease, which is not even something that we were thinking that would happen, and it's causing her pulmonary edema more often. So a device like this would be able to predict pulmonary edema at a very early stage, which I didn't even design to do this, but today it's helping us. So two things, like both from a regulatory standpoint and also from understanding why this product, and that why is a key thing.
Yeah. Now, Khan, if I look at sort of, you're kind of at the opposite side of the spectrum, you're inside the hospital. Was your process very complicated of FDA approval, and was that the biggest one, or are there others that you can point to?
I think if you'd asked me this question 10 years ago, I would have given the same answer Satya did. But after doing 15, 16 of these things, you kind of learn what to do. So like, for example, our last FDA clearance for a full MRI scan, right, which is pretty much, typically it would take 3 years, took us 49 days to get the FDA clearance, right? So that process for us has become easier because we've learned how to do it after year after year. I think the challenge always for me has been figuring out the right sales process, right? What is the right value articulation, who the right stakeholders are, who the decision makers are, who the early adopters are, right? Because you can have a lot of people show up. You need to make sure your early adopters are those that are validating your device, talking about it, and influencing everybody else. If you look at technology adoption curves, the faster you jump the chiasm towards the tipping point to get to the early majority, the faster your rest of the financials and everything aligns. And nailing that early adopter and figuring out who those are, who believe in your value and are not really looking at features and pricing, but more understand and the same mission and value that you have and are able to articulate and validate your product. That becomes very challenging to figure out. I've always had that problem with anything, but it takes time to figure that piece out. I mean, we are growing really fast. So I think we've sold 55 of the scanners since early this year. So that's pretty massive growth that we are doing right now, but we still are struggling with figuring out who the right adopters are, who will believe in the value. And again, it's too early right now to really understand what the future use cases are going to be beyond what MR scanner does today. I mean, think of it, we do so much low yield imaging in emergency scenarios and other scenarios in which we already know the state of the art is 52% accurate, for example, right? It's 2% better than tossing a coin. And we still do these things, whereas complete different modality can significantly increase your accuracy, throughput, and things like that. But the reimbursement doesn't exist, or the standard of care workflows don't exist. When nobody thought of an MRI scanner can go to the patient's bedside, right? Nobody thought it can go in an ambulance. Nobody thought it can go actually a retail clinic. When I get a call from Walmart, they want to put an MRI scanner in the clinic. My question is like, what are you going to do in the clinic? I mean, I'd love to put it every single Walmart right now, but then what are they going to do with it? And what kind of patients will be assessed? What kind of disease will be assessed there? Those things get complicated to figure out and answer. If you just jump on and start doing the stuff, then you're just adding to the healthcare problem. You're adding to costs. People are getting MR scanners, getting reimbursed at a higher rate, whereas our mission really is to democratize healthcare and not become a problem to the cost, especially reduce the cost of care by making this affordable and accessible. So I think I would say that for me, the challenge has been really figuring out who the right early adopters are.
Thank you. I know Jennifer and Smithy, for both of you, early adopters have been a big part of the equation here. And you have to do that obviously alongside FDA approval. So the two both kind of go hand in hand, right? Any comments from either of you?
Yeah, I could go. For us, Adnan, as you said, customer adoption was the biggest, right? So fortunately for us, we were specifically designing products to address the pain points in surgery today and in healthcare today. When we started out, we knew that cadaver training or doing surgeries on a bell pepper or a pumpkin was not sufficient. It was not going to cut it. And no one wanted the future of healthcare or even the current state of healthcare to be this way. Surgeons wanted a better tool. They wanted to, train better and not train on patients, which is how it's been for decades. So we built the product for those customers. And so the customers have always been, our biggest asset. Early on, like 5-6 years ago when we started out and we were learning and we were just kids, the biggest challenge for us was actually to get investors on board because the technology seems so futuristic and not real. It seems surreal to have advanced knowledge of something that's going to happen in the future before it happens, and in surgery, which is something that's never been the case. So for us, that was like, well, pilots train before they operate. You do a wedding rehearsal before your wedding. So why are surgeons not rehearsing, right? So this was like so no-brainer for us that we went for it, and the customers came to us, but the investors were like, no, I don't see this happening. How are you going to get physicians to change the way they have practiced surgery since the beginning, since the start? And the start, it was see one, do one, teach one. It's still that way. That needs to change. So that was like our challenge, that we took on this big problem. We knew the customers believed in us. We didn't know how to convince the investors. So we're like, screw that, right? And we just ran with whatever we had. We bootstrapped the company till date, and we'd only raised $650,000 to get it to this point. We're about to be FDA cleared. The product launch is in Q2. So that was the challenge for us. And as Khan said, if you've done this 15, 16 times, it's no big deal to get investors on board and to get through the FDA clearance process. It's a breeze. I mean, it's not, I'm sure it's not, but it's relatively simple. You've done this before. For us as first-time founders, it was definitely not the case. Now the challenge is different. We're about to do our product launch post FDA clearance. We're setting up our QMS systems. The question is, how are we going to execute, right? So we're executing piece by piece. We're starting out in one indication, which is just genitourinary conditions, because we see the value of preventative care and preventing chronic kidney disease as an example. If surgeons can do a better job of treating kidney cancer and basically preserving renal function, they can prevent loss of kidney function, which leads to chronic kidney disease, which leads to dialysis in the future. So that's where we're starting. And then the question is, well, what about cardiology? What about neurosurgery? All of these fields need the solution. So how quickly are we going to ramp up? So that's our big pain point right now.
Thank you. That was a I'm sure people found that very illuminating. Investors who would not believe, focus on certain key opinion leaders, focus on on a very specific vertical, on a very specific procedure in your case. Jennifer, your experience?
I would have to say the hardest part of the equation, not unlike what you just heard, actually was the investment landscape. So we looked at a lot of different models for how to deliver a technology to market in the healthcare system, and basically 40% of our target customers don't even see a doctor. Right? There's nothing for them that treats what we can do for them, so they're not even bothering to see a physician. And of those that do, 70% will see an ENT. So our target base is pretty straightforward. We ended up we chose to go direct to consumer with an over-the-counter business model. So consumer has the pain point, consumer's going to put out the money. Even if we went for reimbursement, it would be 10 years, 12 years before you get reimbursement, the way the system works today. So knowing that, it's going to be cash pay. We priced for cash pay. We designed for the product for cash pay so that the system, but boy, getting in the door, if the word OTC was any place on our deck, was really, really difficult. So our funding has ended up being predominantly through physicians, key opinion leaders, the president of the U.S. Advanced Institute for Sinus Care and Research, the head of Stanford Sinus Center. So we've had a very good quality physician banking, and then that has been complemented by the nice thing about this particular product was even in the earliest phases when we had a working prototype, somebody could sit down, try it, and in a few minutes time, they said, boy, this worked. I haven't been able to breathe for years. Suddenly I'm breathing in a few minutes time. So people could experience the value very, very quickly. So fundraising we've fundraised through Angel, through smaller funds, and through the people that really understand the problem. Definitely the business model in the venture world has not proven to be all that constructive for an over-the-counter product model. The FDA stuff, though, was much easier than I expected it to be honest.
Dean, what about you? What was the toughest part of launching your product or scaling your product?
The toughest part was knowing ourselves in this realm. It's pretty amazing to hear Khan having gone through 15 iterations. For us, it was fairly new, and kind of knowing all the steps needed. So we started where we were familiar with research. So we were invited to do one of the largest research projects, and we applied our product. Our agreement with the community was we would do the app in the community, and we would have a full, and we did it, and it's been amazing to kind of be validated through this population, and then larger population, which is social media and all this new world that we're becoming familiar with. So it's actually being used rapidly at a much larger scale than we expected. As far as funding, it's been all bootstrapping through our own funds and our friends and Angel. But fairly soon, because of where we are, I think we're going to go to the next stage, next step of evolution.
Okay, thank you. We're going to open it up for audience questions in a few minutes. I have a couple more that I'd like to get through, but if you can start writing down your questions in the chat, we'll call upon you, when we get to that section. So please start thinking about it. So this brings me to kind of my next question. So a lot of tech businesses have benefited from the pandemic. What has been your experience? Has your business benefited from the pandemic? And in your part of the ecosystem, do you think that the pandemic, the kind of societal shifts that it has created, does that support your business, or is it not helpful? Can we start with maybe Jennifer? What do you think?
Riding the pandemic wave has been interesting for us. 2020, we had just launched. So we were right at that phase when you're testing your ads and trying to hone your messaging and figure out really how to optimize. And doing that inside of a news cycle around an oil crash, a pandemic breaking, Black Lives Matter, the movement around, just learning how sensitive our advertising dollars are to whatever is in the news cycle, independent of the actual health crisis underlying it, was something that really we had to navigate. Inventory, supply chain, all of the issues, the consequences. I mean, my supply chain manager, when the Suez Canal happened, thought we were done. I thought we had it all taken care of. But the pandemic as a whole, I mean, in terms of COVID's effect, it has a couple of opportunities for us. One is we're selling direct to healthcare, direct to the consumer. So we did not experience the crunch at the healthcare center. And that crunch is there, whether it's pandemic specific or not, that crunch on the healthcare system is there. So being able to deliver direct to consumer is a model that I think we're going to see increasing in value and increasing in need. Allowing consumers to find their own healthcare information and provide them and arm them, to empower them to manage chronic conditions. So I'm very intrigued by some of the comments here. And at a fairly crude level, we do treat flu and cold now, and symptoms of COVID. My son just got his COVID vaccine last night and was scouring the house for his Clear Up device this morning to deal with his congestion and inflamed tissues. Long-term effects, the long-haul COVID symptoms are very much linked into inflammatory and immune responses, which is what on our long vision, the vision for the company and where we've been testing, we are going after that immune response. So that in and of itself, unfortunately, does create an opportunity space for us from a health perspective to begin offering new solutions in inflammatory management.
Great, thank you. Other perspectives?
Yeah, and then I can go. We actually ended up pivoting during the COVID crisis because we were in Houston, and Houston was really struggling. Right around end of February, March, hospitals had run out of every single piece of PPE that they had. So they were resigning to using garbage bags for gowns, and they had no masks. So they were using their N95s for weeks long at length, right? And that is really, really sad. And we work with those hospitals. So the hospitals were calling us, and we're a 3D printing company. They asked us to 3D print masks and face shields and parts for ventilators. And we're like, this is not how this works. These are medically regulated devices. They need testing and NIOSH clearance before they can get in your hands. You can't just 3D print everything. That's not a solution to all your worldly problems in this COVID crisis. We have to be cognizant of all of this. So what we ended up doing was we started out 3D printing face shields, and we were printing hundreds a day, and the hospitals needed hundreds of thousands a day. So there was no way that we were going to meet that demand with 3D printing. And that's not the primary, power of 3D printing is to prototype and iterate, not to mass produce. So we ended up borrowing a ton of money, short of $1 million, at our own risk to basically take on this challenge of scaling our PPE production. So we ended up creating metal parts to injection mold face shields and provided and as well as source masks. So the FDA registered ASTM level 1 masks that were going out to all emergency clinics, hospitals, hospital systems in Houston and all over the country. We ended up supplying over 1.5 million units of PPE. And that was like 3 months for us. So we had to shift. It was insane. We had to shift from a bespoke, single unit, high margin product to a extremely high volume, extremely low margins product, all within a week of time. And basically money came in, money went out. It was all happening so fast. But we did this because we felt that if we don't do it and the government isn't doing it, the people are going to die. We didn't want doctors to die. And that's the mission of Lazarus, is to improve healthcare. And it was in line with our mission. It's not our core competency. It's not our core technology. We're not, logistics company, but this is what we had to do. So COVID helped us tremendously, because in that process, we were building relationships and trust with large hospital systems in the US that were not already our existing customers. And for existing customers, when we stepped up our game and we did this, it shows that we care. And that's what people want. They want you to do something about the current problems if you have the ability to do anything at all. Right. So COVID extremely was beneficial for us, because now we're the largest PPE suppliers to Harris Health System in the Texas Medical Center. And hospitals have moved past, asking us for PPE and are now asking us for our core technology, which is patient-specific rehearsal models, how they can get their hands on them. Right now, there is reimbursement codes for them already. CPT codes were issued last year. So now they want to know how they can exercise those codes and use them to improve safety and patient outcomes. So that was like really a huge learning curve for us to pivot like this. Obviously, we're back to our core business. We have been for quite a while, but we learned a lot, and we were grateful to our community for trusting us. And obviously now it has helped us in a tremendous way.
I just want to jump there. First of all, amazing. Smithy, you're amazing, and how you adapted, the brilliant way that you adapted and change with the times is going to be reflective of whatever business you take on. I can tell you that. You're absolutely, and also how you've helped society. On our end, we were actually online before all this, and most of our research was being done online through Zoom or Skype back then. I don't know what happened to Skype, but Zoom and all these other venues. And so it was very quick adaptation, and more communities came to us. And given that it's cognition and cognitive depression, anxiety, and all that stuff is part of it, we were overwhelmed by the number of communities and people that wanted to kind of work with us. And of course, in doing so, also adapt the app and give us feedback, which helped evolve the app, and is continuing to help evolve the app, and speaks to the fact that a situation like this can serve as an opportunity to change, to adapt, to better improve, and also to reach out in more innovative ways. So that's been our journey in this COVID era.
I can chime in, Adnan, if you mind. So
please go ahead. I was just going to call upon you.
Sure. Our plan was to commercialize the product in December of this year, aligned with the Radiology Society of North America conference in Chicago, right? So we were planning of this big event where we will start commercializing the product, and then pandemic hit. And late March is when I got the first call from one of the New York hospitals asking, is there any way they can get a scanner, because their ICUs are inundated, all ventilators are used up by patients, and they're seeing neurological complications in patient and no way to scan. So we had to figure out how to accelerate our manufacturing, supply chain, commercializing product like 8 months ahead of schedule for MRI scanner that was still trying to figure out. So it was all hands on deck, 24/7, figuring out how to get it done. And our first scanner showed up at North University Hospital in second week of April, first week of April. We went commercial just because of COVID 6 months ahead of schedule. So, but it required a lot of efforts. It required working with this. We are based in Guilford, Connecticut. The manufacturing facilities in New Hampshire. So we had to work with the state government authorities to allow us to work in lockdown, be able to move around, to show up in hospitals. Or we had to order our own PPE for support purposes. We ended up getting a lot more, ended up donating most of it to other hospitals just because we had to figure out how to get to the hospitals. Not only, we never, other than research purposes, used devices like at different hospitals. We'd never actually done and been used in clinical environment at all, right? And we are figuring out how people actually use in clinical environment, how will they actually order an EMR and get the results coming in for the first time in the middle of a pandemic that was happening. So it was a lot of learning, a lot of things to figure out, but it helped us focus really fast and not get stuck in analysis paralysis, and really make quick decisions. And we empowered the teams to just make decisions what needs to happen to make it quickly, things done quickly and connect. I think that really helped us accelerate and commercialize 6 months ahead of schedule.
Wonderful. Satya, I'm sure there were lots of people not going to the hospital or to the clinic during the pandemic. I would imagine that helped your adoption.
Yeah, absolutely. For us, it was, I mean, a lot of patients can be treated at home. We don't want to be inundating, crowding the setting. And also people who are scheduled for regular visits, they were not able to do it. And most of them were moved to telemedicine visits. And doctors didn't have that subjective data. And during that same time, hospital at home readmission or reimbursement programs were implemented. So for us, a device like this would be phenomenal because it not only measures early and progressive signs and symptoms of COVID, like temperature, SpO2, pulse rate, and lung functions and others, but it also helped chronic disease patients stay home, monitor their health, and also like relay that information to their physicians. So it was very helpful. We got a couple of grants from the National Science Foundation and from NIH to actually build a surveillance system. Now we have a surveillance system that integrates our device and a high definition like system that can actually work with Johns Hopkins physicians. So it was a fantastic time, and I think finally people realized the value of measuring multiple parameters. That was the biggest turning point for us.
Great. Thank you. So I'm going to start going to some audience questions now. So Satya, there is one question from Clay. Clay, would you unmute yourself and ask the question if possible? Otherwise, I can read it out.
No, I saw the question. I can jump in and answer if it helps.
Okay, go ahead, please.
So, basically from our standpoint, I think I know the accuracy, reliability, safety, and all those things are critical to our business or to our company. So the benchmark that I set is to every employee or every person in the company is, would you trust this and then give this device to your mom for monitoring her health? If they say no, then go fix it or just work on it. And that's what it really took us, like 7 years to get to where we are today. We have did everything, every single parameter was clinically validated. Let's say, for example, SpO2, right? We went through hypoxia study where patients are hooked up to masks where they hold the device, and at the same time, they've been forced to bring down their oxygen saturation from 100 all the way to like 65 or 60 in some cases, and then take it all the way up to 100 again. And we measure in like several patients. And with blood pressure, we went through almost 90.
Satya, if I may, I think the interesting part of the question is, for someone who's developing a product of the same nature, what's your suggestion of dealing with accuracies, right? Because, and I think I'd like to put this to Han as well, maybe after you, is that, these are light devices. They are not in a hospital setting. These are not the kind of the standard of care type devices, right? So these are home devices. What is adequate, and how do you kind of defend the fact that your device does an adequate job?
No, absolutely. I think that's where FDA has a set of guidelines, right, and standards and requirements. And then we had like 15 reviewers going through every single line that we wrote in our application. It was like some 4,000, 5,000 pages worth of information that includes like valuing it with the gold standard. So we don't just put a pulse ox. For example, as I said, it's easier to explain, like with pulse ox, we don't put another pulse ox or 10 pulse oxes in people's hand and then compare it with our device, but we compare with a gold standard. We get the blood draw from the patient and measure the oxygen saturation in the blood, which is the gold standard according to the FDA. So we had to do that with patients.
So FDA guidelines is basically
the standard. Yes, yeah. Exactly. Yep.
Okay. Khan, I think you had some similar concerns when you came up with this portable MRI device.
Yeah, I think the FDA has evolved significantly in the last 5-10 years, right? It used to be just, show stuff and it's fine, but now they're much more attuned to what the clinical validation that is needed for a particular device. And they push you for that. Like, for example, for us, they wanted to make sure that our device performed the same way as a 1.5 Tesla scanner does, right? So our device is a 0.064 Tesla, which is the field strength of the magnet, which is significantly less than 1.5 Tesla big scanners you see in the hospitals, but they set the bar high. We had to prove that our accuracy of detection of disease was similar to 1.5 Tesla, right? So that was pretty significant. I'm on the board of another company, investor, a company called Kasana Care, that is making a toilet seat that can do blood pressure, cardiac output, and stroke volume, right? And we did our initial validations against, echocardiography and things like that. FDA pushed back, and they said they needed accuracy compared to MRI scans, right? So over there, we're doing studies in Hopkins and Penn where we're validating the cardiac output and stroke volume measured by a toilet seat to be equal to what the cardiac output is measured on MRI, which is way more accurate than any other modalities that are out there, right? So a lot has changed. It used to be that FDA just wanted similar data, and if it's similar, that's fine. But now they're asking for more. And the new MDR regulation for EU have gotten even more strict about some of these things that require now validation as part of, even for the 510K type of process, if you are just trying to show that you're equivalent to a predicate device. Now, things have evolving, things are changing much faster. I think I'm going to stop at that.
Thank you. Jennifer, I think you may have something to add here.
For entrepreneurs who are developing technologies in the space, particularly, one of the things that caught me by surprise was actually FDA is not the big hurdle you have to worry about. It is reimbursement. And Medicare drives the reimbursement landscape. They're not allowed to consider either cost, and they don't consider side effect benefits. So what they're really looking for is superiority of performance over the standard of care. So that is specifically something for treatment options that we have had to really address, is demonstrating that the technology not only is good enough to meet the standard that pharmaceuticals meet, but can provide a superior experience to pharmaceutical solutions to even get a seat at the table for discussion. So when it comes accuracies and diagnostics, I would imagine that there's probably something similar to navigate, and getting a reimbursement consultant looking and getting that conversation with some kind of Medicare, who's really going to help drive through that space, is important a lot earlier than you think, maybe even before your FDA regulators that you bring on.
Adnan, if you don't mind, I could add to that. So for us, this was our first FDA submission, and for entrepreneurs that are out there doing med device, everyone thinks of the FDA before you've dealt with them, that they're this scary, intimidating body of government that's out there to get you. That's not the case. They're actually, they've been extremely supportive and really facilitated discussions with our team. We actually submitted our application for a non-diagnostic application, and they encouraged us to consider, basically converting to a diagnostic without sort of the standard route, which would have delayed us by 6 months. So they actually work extremely closely with us. And with regards to accuracies, you can have this conversation with the team when you're having those meetings with the FDA and ask them those questions. And it's really like Satya said, if you think this is safe for, giving it to your mom or for your self-use, like if I had a surgery tomorrow and I wanted my surgeon to practice, would I feel safe giving my surgeon a replica of a Lazarus 3D model of me to rehearse before they operated on me? And if that answer is yes, then you're doing a good job. Then that's the accuracy and the safety that is required. I think it boils down to, are you going to negatively impact the outcome or kill the patient? And those are sort of like the base level expectations. Of course, all of us are trying to do more than that and try to improve the outcome for the patient. And I agree with Jennifer. Our biggest fear was reimbursement, and we were fortunate that those CPT codes were released last year under category 3. So that means our technology is we've already received reimbursement from private insurers. And the question is how we get CMS and Medicare and Medicaid on board. So that is going to take a few years, and we expect, or we hope that it's not going to be 5-10 years, and it's going to be faster than that. But that's what our industry, precision medicine, precision healthcare in 3D printing, is working towards getting those approvals so that they become Category 1 codes and become reimbursable through CMS, so that the mass population can benefit from it.
Okay, great. So we're almost out of time. I'm going to do one last question, and I'd appreciate a 30-second or less response. So Open is a community of entrepreneurs. A lot of folks in this audience are looking at you. You guys made it. They're looking for advice. If they were to start their digital device, healthcare device startup, what is the one piece of advice that you would give them to help them on their journey? So we'll start with the most experienced person, looks like, on this panel, which is Khan. Khan, what's your 30-second one advice?
I think understand your problem you're trying to solve inside out. Understand there is a problem, number one, that you're trying to solve. Don't start with the idea first. Start with the problem, really understand what that is, really understand your market well, understand your customer well. I think those are way more important than what actually you end up doing, right? So, and then as Jennifer and others have said, right, it's the timing and the reimbursement and who pays for it type of things come into play. Technology can always, I mean, engineers, you put a lot of people on it, they'll eventually figure it out. I think the other pieces are the harder one. I'll stop here.
Thank you. Who'd like to go next? Dean?
I agree with Khan. I think the most important thing is to know your audience. In research and in medicine, we kind of apply one model that was developed on 50-year-old white men in Boston and then apply it to 70-year-old Hispanic women in San Bernardino. And then we say it failed. No, it's because we haven't connected with the people, with the problem, and the problem as it pertains to the particular population. That's the precision component. It's not the technology, but it's the person at the end of the day. So really going down to the level of the person and understanding the problem at that level. That's important.
Thank you. Satya?
Yeah, I think for me, like problem and people and everything is great. But one thing a lot of companies, even like app companies, should focus on is quality management system. Those 3 letters are very important, or like essentially QMS is following set of guidelines, following your quality, and then like having some traceability. It sounds like strange, but I wanted to, as a CEO, I always wanted to learn every single aspect of how this business is done. And it starts with quality. A lot of companies miss that part, run way ahead, and then go back and figure out, oh my God, I missed this aspect. So if you're starting, if you have a problem and solution, then just go and then start documenting everything, which is very important.
Great. And Jennifer?
So I think it's a myth that great entrepreneurs are big risk takers. Good entrepreneurs and the best of the entrepreneur world are good risk assessors and risk reducers. So everything you're hearing is about what are the forms of risk present in the company, whether it's, is there a problem, is there consumer adoption, will we get the necessary financials. So I would say really try to understand the risk profile of the business, look at how you reduce those risks in a sequential and serial fashion, and focus on your milestones. And that has been the formula that has served me. And I will say one other thing, the idea that all of us have made it, come talk to us when we're 100 million in revenue or sitting on the public market at $1 billion in market cap, and then we can talk about having made it. We're still fighting the battle in the trenches.
Love it. Thank you. And Smithy, we'll give you the last word.
Yeah, Adnan, I think you're very kind to say that we've made it. I think this is the start of my journey here. So I'm learning on the go. I think for me, once you've identified a need, the questions you should ask yourself is what the need is, how big is the market? And once you've identified those, I think you just go for it. There's always going to be something that, people will say, oh, that's impossible. Like, you can't really make this happen. Or you're always going to find deficiencies by yourself. Like I need funding. I need, I have a prototype. Now I need to, do clinicals. I need regulatory. I need to go through that. I need reimbursement. Well, all of this, your problems will always be there. But if you let your problems get in your way, you're not going to achieve anything. So you just have to go with the flow. Your problems are always evolving, and that's always for a better good. So just embrace it and let it happen. Don't let it stop you. I think that's my biggest advice.
Well, thank you so much to all of you. So for the audience, we will have breakout rooms at the end at 1 o'clock, between 1 and 1:30. And all of the panelists here have very kindly agreed to be part of those breakout rooms. So, please hang around or come back, find them in those breakout rooms. And I'm sure, you'll be able to have some good interactions with them. So with that, again, thank you very much for my wonderful panel. And I'd like to hand it back to Farhan for the next set of panelists.
Thank you, Adnan.
Thanks, Adnan.
Excellent discussion. Also want to say thank you to Jennifer, Dr. Khan, Satya, Smithy, and Dean for your valuable time, some wonderful advice, and I'm sure all of us can benefit from it. Most of the entrepreneurs who come to Open Silicon Valley are looking for these kind of advices as they're embarking on their journey. And they have a lot to learn from entrepreneurs like yourself. So we truly appreciate your time, and we'll look forward to connecting with you in future as well. I know it's only April, and our annual event is way down far in November. But I would like to extend an invitation today, and obviously we'll follow up with Adnan as well to our annual event that is attended by more than about 3,000 people. So we'll look forward to having you there and listening more from you. So thank you so much for your time. And thank you, Adnan, as well. So for those who might be joining us late, this session was moderated by Adnan Lavai. Adnan is the founder and CEO of Folio 3. He's also a founding partner and Mentors Fund and a charter member of Open Silicon Valley. Thank you, Adnan, for your time once again. So I hope everybody had their cup of coffee early in the morning and is ready for the final session of the day today, which is cost and convenience of digital health. This session is being moderated by Megan Barry. She's the founder at By Reveal, and she's also a partner at Mentors Fund. After this session, we'll have breakout rooms for 30 minutes where you will get a chance to connect one-on-one with most of the panelists that you have been listening to in this session and in the next session as well. So with that, I will hand it over to you, Megan. Can you unmute your line and take the session?
Well, hello, everyone. Happy Saturday. It's been an exciting day for you all. So I'm would like to extend a welcome to our next panelists. We have a great group here that will be an exciting conversation about the cost and convenience of digital health. So feel free to please put your questions in the chat throughout, and we will get to them and we will mix them in to the conversation, as well as hold some of them for the Q&A at the end. And then we also, to echo Farhan's point, we hope to keep you all for the following 30 minutes where we'll have breakout sessions and each of you can meet each other informally and ask any burning questions that you may have held back. So thank you to all of our panelists here, and I would now like to have each of you introduce yourselves. So Hamad, please introduce yourself and share with us a little bit about your background.
Absolutely. First of all, thanks for having me. So I'm a chief technology officer at HealthTap, and as I was thinking how to share my background, I thought the best way would be to describe it. There are two distinct halves of my career so far. The first one, I was basically working on solving some of the foundational challenges in mobile computing and cloud. So that phase led me to working for almost 5 years at Apple, where I worked on things like the iPhone, the iPad, and the iCloud. The second phase is when I got more interested in solving problems using the infrastructure that I had been working on up till now. So after a couple of stops along the way, I realized that the biggest problem that was worth solving, and also the biggest opportunity, was in how care gets delivered. And that's what led me to HealthTap. So speaking about HealthTap a little bit, before we go into the more details later, So we started as a platform for connecting two communities. On the one side, we have doctors, and on the other side, there are care seekers. And our job as the builders and maintainers of this platform is to find more efficient and convenient ways of helping these communities to benefit from each other. And sometimes they benefit across these communities, sometimes within them, but that's what we do. And this approach is relatively unique in healthcare, and I'm humbled and proud at the same time to say that using this approach, we have enabled hundreds of millions of care seekers to get help from by now like 90,000 US licensed doctors in almost 150 specialties. And I'll be happy to talk more about what is like how we did it and what kind of interactions we enable on our platform.
Wonderful, thank you. We're excited to learn more about that. Dr. Wakaz, would you like to share with us a little bit about your background and how you started?
Sure, thanks, Megan. I'm a nephrologist by profession and a graduate of King Edward Medical College, moved to US in 2007. And I started, journey like most of the physician with the practice. And 4 years ago, actually 5 years ago, started this company, American Telephysician, out of passion to help my parents who live in Pakistan, how to be involved in their care. Quite a big challenge is what I was facing as a caregiver. My mother has a chronic liver disease, and how could I be more involved in her care? So we started our journey with actually a project in Pakistan named Shifa for You, a healthcare marketplace where to connect all the healthcare services, labs, online doctors, radiology, everything. How can we get the care at the home? Because most of the times the parents or old patients don't, it's hard for them to go out and get this care services. And that project led us to a lot of recognitions in the US, and we're also invited by United Nations, been with the speaker with United Nations since then. And we finally brought this project in the US with the name Cura for You. And now we are operational in multiple countries, not only US, we are also operational in Nigeria, as well as also starting in Australia. So essentially, the company is a group of multi-specialty physicians, physician-led venture. We have our own IT team, more than 70 developers in Lahore, Pakistan, and providing the physician services by telemedicine, direct to patients, as well as to senior living facilities. And we're also running marketplace projects so patients can find and healthcare services at discounts. And lastly, we also provide technology services helping other physicians' practices so they all can also start telemedicine or online clinics. Obviously, we'll talk more in the question answer session. So thank you so much.
Wonderful. We're definitely going to be picking your brain on the scalability of it. So Fahad, tell us a little bit about your journey. And I know you had a pivot as well. So share with the audience your background.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I am co-founder of Care Merge. We are a healthcare startup with focus on aging population. I'm also a writer to Forbes magazine, where I talk about healthcare technologies. My background is in technology for over 20 years now. 10 years, I got a chance to work with a lot of different organizations and travel across the world. And then came a point in my life and I said, okay, I need to do something on my own. And I decided to quit my job, met with my co-founder, and we came up with this brilliant idea that we can build a Facebook for healthcare. And this is like 2012, 13, when Facebook was popular, everyone was signing up. And on that idea, we quit our jobs and started working on it. A few weeks into it, we realized that's a bad idea. No one wants to talk about their sickness, illness, or medications, or share that with their friends. So we had to pivot. We got an opportunity to spend a couple of weeks in a senior living community in suburbs of Chicago. And while we were there, we saw some of the challenges firsthand. The community is responsible for taking care of 100 or 200 older adults 24/7. And while they're doing that, they also have to communicate with the family members and keep them up to date on their well-being. So no matter how good they were in the communities, the communication part was missing. And that was creating a lot of friction between the communities and the family members. So we believe that technology could change that. And we started this journey and build a platform that allows the senior living communities to provide better care to their residents, but also be able to communicate with the family members. It's been over 9 years now. We were able to raise over $20 million in funding. We are serving over close to 600 communities in 41 states. And we were just named one of the fastest growing companies by Inc. 5000 last year.
Well, congratulations. And Nabil, share with us, I know you're going to be a couple steps right behind on all of these awards because you're just collecting them in daily. So please introduce yourself and family.
Thanks, Megan. Hello and assalamu alaikum. I'm Nabil Kaukab, and it's a pleasure to be with everyone here today. I'm the founder and CEO of John Health, which is a digital health company focused on leveraging easy-to-use technology and artificial intelligence to improve healthcare outcomes for patients, while addressing the increasing cost and profitability challenges that face the healthcare industry today. We've built a core platform, Family, which provides healthcare systems and physicians with an AI-powered care management platform that enables them to significantly increase their profit margins while more easily managing their elderly and Medicaid patient populations that struggle with chronic diseases and general healthcare needs that arise outside the office visit. And if you think about it, that's really where 99% of healthcare management occurs, where there's no healthcare professional to help these patients. Now, from a background standpoint, my background's a little bit different from most of the people on here, as I'm Midwestern raised, East Coast educated, former global investment banker, who wound up going to entrepreneurship after a long career as a healthcare expert on Wall Street. So I wasn't, a 25-year-old wonderkind who started his first business. And although I did work at a startup in my first job coming out of school. But kind of an interesting background. Not everyone has to be from Silicon Valley, and I think our company helps show especially in the world of healthcare, there's a lot of innovation happening all over the country and all over the world. And finally, I'll end on a personal note. Despite my American roots, both myself and my wife Saima, we've managed to raise a 6-year-old third-generation daughter, Fatima, who starts every morning by singing the Pakistani national anthem. So I guess at least I'm doing something right.
Well, kudos to that. That's phenomenal. And nobody likes bankers, so good thing you switched to become an entrepreneur.
Absolutely.
Well, perfect. So Nabil, we'll start off with you. Families in this unique position, you're increasing convenience both on the doctor's side as well as on the patient's side, while decreasing the cost for providers. But tell us a little bit about the challenges that you're facing. To kind of piggyback on the last panel, there are a lot of kind of industry challenges that people immediately think of, but you've kind of approached different things. So share with us a little bit about what you're seeing as far as implementing these digital tools.
Sure. I'll preface this question. We just as a reminder, so for our company, we sell primarily into the provider setting. So this ranges from individual physicians and groups all the way up to large health systems. And those are our customers. And, oftentimes people think about regulatory issues as being one of the biggest challenges in healthcare, and they are a hurdle, especially if you're in a device or pharmaceutical setting. But for what we do and for what we see in digital, I'd actually, there's two themes that pop up as sort of the two biggest challenges that any company faces. The first one is, I'll use a medical term that, if there's any physicians in the audience that they'll appreciate and understand, and it's the word malpractice. But not in the normal tone that you think of malpractice from the standpoint of as a physician. I think about malpractice from the standpoint of technology companies. Technology companies have done malpractice to physicians and providers, throughout the history of the health tech industry. I always joke with some of my clients, when I go see their offices or their hospitals, if I look at their EHR, their electronic health record systems, oftentimes it looks like Windows 95 threw up on their screen. I've written software for over 25 years, and I get intimidated looking at most EHRs in terms of how they're developed, how the UIs work, et cetera. And there's a reason why when you talk to the average physician, when they think about a technology solution or implementation, they don't think, oh, great, I'm going to get increases in productivity and efficiency. They think, oh, shoot, I'm going to actually have to spend a lot of time doing worthless, button pressing and clicking, and this is going to make my life more difficult, not easier. So that's theme number one, helping them overcome that inherent bias they have that technology makes their lives harder, not easier. I think number two, that's an equally important kind of theme and challenge, I think, for digital health companies, is healthcare is a complex business, right? It's, you know, I always compare it to children's toys in terms of how the model works, because you have three key stakeholders. You've got the patients, the insurance companies, and the healthcare providers who are oftentimes providing the core service. And just like children's toys, where you have kids who want to consume toys, but they don't have the budget to pay for it, insurance companies control who and what you can see, how you can work, and they have their own incentives. Physicians make money off the service, but you know they have to work with the insurers who pay their bills. And in the middle are patients who are, you know, obviously responsible for their care. Now, the problem with a lot of digital health companies and the challenge that we face is that incentives aren't usually aligned in a way that helps everybody in the system. Usually it's, you know, robbing Peter to pay Paul. You're helping save costs for the provider, for the payer, but that oftentimes comes at the expense of the provider. Or it may be something that is convenient for the patient, but it doesn't make the provider's life any easier or any better. And so it's that second challenge of making sure that incentives align, especially with the provider, who is arguably the only trusted party amongst these key stakeholders. Getting them to have incentives to use technology and to use it and to do things in a different way is the second challenge, because oftentimes most systems aren't set up to reward the people who do the most work.
What other thoughts do the panelists have here around these like med tech startup hurdles that you've faced throughout your journey?
So I'll say that something there from the because I'm sitting on the both of the physician side, being a physician myself, and also running a technology company. One of our product what we are giving to the physician is smart clinics, which basically essentially, as Nabil said, helping physicians, because they're running this all EHR being kind of pretty much way backdated, and most of the time what we see as a physician that basically does not go with the clinical flow. And there's so much frustration in the physician community, especially, you know, switching from one system to other. And but also the insurance companies dictate most of these EHR are based on the revenue cycle management rather than the actual clinical work. So what we are seeing a transition nowadays, for the last 5 or 10 years, ever since this EMR became mandatory choice by the CMS, that you started having, you know, do a lot of that non-clinical workup rather than the actual patient clinical. So that's I think, a big challenge what we are seeing from technology adoption by the physician itself. Now, obviously, on the other side, when you are part of the private practices where you're managing, it's more like a small business, because they're declining, reimbursements are happening in that, I think that industry where you probably something which the software which can improve the revenue cycle management are very much important. But I think when it comes to healthcare system, there's a lot of frustrations by the employed physicians, because then the hospital administration on one side, they want physicians to document, you know, most of the billing encounters and all those things there. Whereas the physician wants to spend more time on the clinical side. So I think understanding the clinical workflow and the patient's experience, if we, that is where I would suggest also the other healthcare technology companies, if they can actually relate to that, who are their end users. And I think if they can focus on that part, the adaptability will be much and much more smoother and quicker.
Well, I hope all the aspiring entrepreneurs in this call are listening to these problems, because the next startups can start off from this. Hamad, do you have anything to add on some of the hurdles that you've seen in the industry?
I think if you start from the end user experience and make that the primary goal, the biggest challenge that we see right now, and the one that we are also hoping to provide a solution for, is the virtual care is one, and then there is care that happens in the real world, like in a clinic. And how do you make that seamless? How do you make sure that it's not like the data about a user is not sitting in silos, which pretty much is the case these days, right? And how does a physician who is providing the care gets to see a whole 360-degree view about the patient? So I think that's something which is a very interesting and also one of the challenges that will have the most fruits if we can address it as an industry.
And Fahad, have you also seen some mindset shifts that you've had to overcome in your business, and share with us some of the hurdles there?
Yeah, absolutely. Just on that point, some of the hurdles, one of the challenges that the healthcare startups have is that who's going to pay them, right? That's the big question that everyone needs to get answer to. Because if you go to patients directly, they don't want to pay anything more because they're already paying for their premiums at insurance companies, right? So they don't want to pay anything more. It applies to younger population as well as to older population who are paying not just the insurance or expecting Medicare and Medicaid to pay on their behalf. So very difficult to get patient to pay for something. If you go to the providers, right, they are already paying so much for all these systems that they have in place. A smaller practice would have anywhere between 10 to 20 systems that they use just to run their operations. For them to have another system to pay for has to bring a lot of value, or they would expect the existing players to provide the same or minimum functionality. Now, when you go to the payers, right, there is an opportunity. There's absolutely an opportunity if you can prove them an ROI that this solution can help you reduce claims or do this. That's not an easy for a startup to prove, especially in the first 2 years of their life when they're just building the product. Now, let alone they have to prove that numbers. So for any healthcare startup or entrepreneur, I always tell them that, when you're building a product, think about who's going to pay for it and why would they pay for it. If you're able to get an answer to that question, you solve 50% of your problems in your healthcare venture. So that's my few thoughts on the hurdles.
Thank you. And that's actually a great segue, because you touched on the patients, and they've already been paying in these premiums, and you specifically deal with folks that are later in life. So with 10,000 people retiring every day, there is more of a need to use technology to help these older adults. And so can you share with us how technology is helping improve care for older adults? And also, how have you handled user engagement? What does that look like? I mean, my grandma is spiffy, but she's still like FaceTime. I still only see half her face. So share with us, like, how have you been dealing with this, and how have you really increased the user experience with your company?
Yeah, that's a big number. 10,000 people in US every day reaching an age of 65. Like, this is like in a year, it's like 4 million people are retiring every year in US. If you look at the cost, we talked about $3.8 trillion healthcare spend in US, right? If you look at just from the cost, not from the quality perspective, just from the cost perspective, if we are younger, 45 and younger, we spend on average $3,000 a year on our healthcare. When we reach 65, we spend around $15,000, right? That's like 5 times. But from 65 to 85, that cost significantly increases from 15 to close to $60,000 a year, right? So you can just do the math that 3.8 trillion, how much older people, how much is spent on the older people and their well-being, right? The good news is that the technology can change that. They can help improve the outcomes, help people live healthier, not just live longer, but live healthier, right? However, if you look at the technology focus, the venture focus is not on when the people are working on healthcare startups, there are less people, less companies working on older aging population. There's more excitement in the younger population that is spending less on healthcare versus more on the older aging population. So I think that the shift that needs to happen is that right now, as we're talking about sick care versus healthcare, it has been historically very preventive care. Every time you go, it has been historically very reactive. You're going to end up in a hospital, and then they provide you care and they provide you services, right? That whole needs to change from reactive to more going into being proactive, right? And then ultimately go into a space with AI and new technologies where it could be predictive. So you can tell that this individual, based on his personal healthcare needs, can end up in the hospital in next 3 months. And this is what you can do to avoid that, right? So technologies, and we can talk more about what technologies can do, but there's a huge opportunity for entrepreneurs to bring the technology and help reduce the cost of healthcare and also provide better care for our aging population.
Dr. Wakaz, what are your thoughts on this? And there's a question came through the chat really around the learning curve around technology. So can you share a little bit about how you've addressed this?
Yeah, so we do provide specialty care physician services in the nursing homes, and technology adoption. It is, I think, a slowly curve. Of course, COVID helped a lot, even with the elderly population, because they got locked down in the nursing homes, started using, those iPhones or the iPads, it became pretty common, Zoom and Skype. So I think that was, it was definitely a pretty augmented, it did augmented the virtual care, the online consultation. I think a key success for us was to also enable involving the family members. Like, we're doing a Zoom family call, so it did allowed family members to schedule appointments for them, and also, especially in the nursing home, what we call an assisted virtual care, that one of our virtual medical assistant or the nurse on the side is basically helping physicians to, have the care. I'll step back and I'll talk about with the Fahad, which elaborated that, the biggest problem, I think, in the US healthcare, obviously everyone is talking about the cost and how can, I think whether it's a consumer side or it's a physician side, the big challenge is the lack of price transparency. And I'll give my example. Before I started this company, 4 years ago, I got an MRI I needed for my back with insurance. I was paying with insurance premium like $1,000 per month. I got a bill of $1,800 because I was told that I did not meet my deductible, and my bill was $1,800 after I got a service there. And I found out if I could have gone to another center, same insurance, my bill would have been $600. I called that imaging center. I told them I don't have insurance. What would the cost? They told me $550. Same MRI on our platform now is $450 because negotiate the cost there. So one challenge I think what we see is that is kind of biggest challenge for the consumer side. The second, I think, is the access, where when people come to hospital, you don't just see a physician there, but you also get all the services, labs, radiology, pharmacy, everything is basically happening there. The biggest challenge is when you go outside the hospital, you just don't need a doctor, but you also need to have diagnostic tests, labs, radiology. And the problem is right now, even all the startups I see, that they are providing the services, but they're still not integrated. So if I'm telling a patient, okay, now I've seen you, let's say even you reduce the cost by telemedicine, but now that patient needs to have a lab diagnostic or radiology, they get struck, okay, where to get those services and where the cost could be there. So what I think is going to definitely happening where the care at the home, which is like an Amazon of care model, but until all these different verticals, diagnostics, labs, radiology, everything, they essentially are integrated into one platform where patients can actually find all the services they need, not only with convenience, but they also can find the cost to be pretty low. I think that will change the landscape for having a care at the home.
And Nabil, your company with family, you integrate a lot of the communications here, whether it's follow up with a patient as well as with the doctor coordination. So can you share with us a little bit about that user engagement and how you've overcome some of the hurdles there?
Sure. This is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. Our company is based around targeting and focusing on providing support to Medicare patients with multiple chronic illnesses. And this is a population where every time I've gone into a customer's office or talk to a prospect, the assumption is old people don't use technology. It's complicated. They're not going to do it. They like the old ways. And I want to hit on kind of two themes here that are important. We've solved this issue in particular. We get, I think, close to 94% engagement rates with people over the age of 65 using our platform. And the reason we have such incredibly high engagement rates, and that's not like just cherry picking a population. We focused on the south side of Chicago, Flint, Michigan, West Texas. We picked the poorest, oldest parts of the country, right, that were the least technology savvy, not just Silicon Valley or Manhattan or Boston. And we got great results because we made sure the technology was made for the people that we're focused on, right? The elderly. And one of our big one of our big themes was, don't make people come to technology, make the technology come to the people where they are, right? How do you avoid the need for new installations of software? How do you avoid the need to have a consistent high-speed internet connection? How do you avoid the need for somebody to have complex directions or a password that changes every 90 days? All these things add friction to the process. And when you're 70, you just want to get help. That's the last thing you're going to do. You're going to pick up the phone and be frustrated by that process instead of going through a technical process. For us, I always joke, I call it my back to the future moment. We started off developing apps and building really sophisticated, easy to use software. And then it hit us as we were testing it out with our patient base. Hey, we'd be much better off just focusing on something like simple SMS, nothing for our patients to install, nothing for them to set up. It's a native application on their phone. In fact, you don't even have a smartphone to use SMS. They're already doing it in order to communicate with their grandchildren, right? Let's go to where our patients are and figure out how to build a service around the technology rather than just layer in another technology for people to learn and follow. So that was, our big realization that helped us kind of get the results that we've achieved. The second thing I do want to sort of bring up is to a point that Fahad brought up. I think it's a really important one for anybody in the audience. There's a lot of great innovation taking place in the world of digital health. One of the things that I look at and I sometimes get frustrated about is that, now this is the ex-banker in me talking, right? So, I spent a long time, I did $60 billion in transactions around the world, every sector in healthcare. And, not that I only see the world in terms of dollars and cents, but, when you're starting a business, oftentimes look to, the adage is go where the money is, right? If you're in healthcare, no offense, Megan, the money is not for you and in your peer group, right? The money is for your parents and your grandparents because, as Fahad mentioned, when you are young, you're relatively healthy. Even if you don't treat yourself, you're still going to be okay. It's as you hit kind of late middle age, your early senior years, when spending grows astronomically and exponentially. The vast majority of spending occurs in that population, but it's not a terribly sexy population to go after, right? Nobody's going to win, an award, or nobody's going to be, trending on Twitter for figuring out a way to get grandma to get the help she needs. But you can make a lot more money, and there's a lot more benefit you add to the system, I think, by tackling those problems, as opposed to figuring out how to get 25 and 30-year-olds to do telemedicine.
Thank you. And to that point, Hamad, can you share with us a little bit about HealthTap and how you claim to bridge this gap between the physical care and the virtual care, which you touched on earlier? But can you share a little bit more and explain how you've really addressed this scale problem and how you really are having that impact?
Oh yeah, sure. So I started with like how the company was conceived, which is as a platform, right? And we were trying to solve the most broadest use case. And what we realized was the need for somebody to see a doctor is not the most frequent use case. There is a different scenario and different use case that is probably like 20x more frequent than that. And that is when somebody basically expresses a concern or writes in a question into a search engine. And the experience that you get in that case is either you get a very generic article, which would make you believe that your headache is a brain cancer, or you would get really detailed instructions from somebody who, like a stranger who you really don't know if you can trust. So what we did at the very beginning was we basically said, if doctors are the most trustworthy source of information for medical help, then how can we make it super easy, super cheap, in fact free, for somebody to present their question and have sometimes one, sometimes more than one doctors answering your personalized question in a very reasonable time frame, like in hours or sometimes in minutes. So that's where we started, and that's what allowed us to help so many people at scale. And but we so that was the starting point. Of course, there are scenarios where you actually do need to see a doctor, right, in person, and that's when we said, okay, now we need to build the next layer of care delivery, and we did that, and then we of course had to build lots of other connections to the real world, like labs and pharmacies and so on. And now what we are seeing is through industry collaboration efforts like Commonwealth, where there are like thousands of US healthcare systems that are sharing their health data, so that we can actually present a unified view of a patient's health record. We are enabling that virtual to physical connectivity. It's still not perfect, and that's why I said it's a challenge that we are all working towards to solve. But going back to your question of scale, if we restrict our focus or lens to one doctor, one person setting, then of course it's no better than a physical world where somebody walks into a room and sees a doctor. So we have to, when we think about how technology will address this, we have to see how we can take doctors' knowledge and then scale it to not just that one-to-one interaction, but then beyond that. So so what we do, as I said, the first use case was something like Stack Overflow or Quora, where only doctors are answering questions, and then people from all over the world are able to ask those questions. Or many times when they come in and they ask a question, there's already an answer that is available immediately for you because somebody had the same concern and doctors already answered it. But I mentioned two of those scenarios, right? The advice and the one-on-one care. And we solved that one-on-one care with a very different model where you press a button and in 30 seconds, there's somebody like a doctor talking to you in your state, licensed in your state. That's supported by our 90,000 plus US doctor network. But what we also did was using all the knowledge that the system accumulated over the past 10 or so years, we have built this AI triaging service where basically this bot will ask you a bunch of questions and then guide you to the right level of care. Not everybody needs to go to the ER, but when they do, then that's the very first thing you should be doing. Or not everybody needs to be seen by the doctor right away. But this triaging system helps you find the right care at the right time and also hopefully at the right price. So those are some of the things that we have done at HealthTap to scaling the limited supply of doctor attention and the very most valuable supply of doctor attention, and then benefiting a lot more people than just a one-to-one interaction with a lab.
Dr. Wakaz, can you expand on that and how you've addressed this scale issue?
Yeah, Megan. So obviously our company's focus from day one, because of my personal incidents, cost, lack of price transparency, and also how can improve the access so they can get the care can be given at home. We built two platforms, because if you think from the patient perspective, or if you want to bring the care at home, two things needs to happen. One thing is that all the services needs to be at least nearby or at the home. Second, the cost has to be pretty low. Good news is obviously when we saw the GoodRx, how the GoodRx became IPO company. I mean, even people who have insurance, they were still using GoodRx, and it doesn't matter if you have insurance or not. I mean, you still, most of the time on those drugs, you pay less than your copay. So that's why people started using GoodRx more and more. When we saw this, we built two platforms. One was the Cure for You, where we started a healthcare marketplace. We contracted with Quest Diagnostics for nationwide labs discount rates. So you can actually get a CBC just for $9, like LFT for $14. Whereas if you don't have insurance and you just, or if you're out of network, which really, even with insurance, you will find later on, I have seen bill for CBC only more than $100. So we did with it Quest Diagnostics, and we contracted with over 900 radiology centers, contracted rates with them for cash base. Then we started home diagnostics kits. The fourth part was to how to bring doctors the care, and obviously the virtual care was the best mode there. In order to do that, we built a second platform named Smart Clinic, which was helping a lot of independent physicians and physician practices so they can see patients online. Now, one thing obviously in a lot of, for layman, it's not just the video that you, being a physician, you need to have patients' medical records, structured data, and all those things there. So I think with helping that platform enable us to bring a lot of specialist physicians on board and helping them to start a lot of, so we started our own physician service lines. For example, we did NeuroX for neurology care, RenalX for nephrology. So build those physicians while building that physician network. In the meantime, we were building our ancillary services network, and we combined those two to kind of bring this service there. We started with Florida in the US for physician services. We have now launched in Texas, and obviously with the telemedicine online services, it is highly regulated and still kind of keep changing the trend, especially when you're talking about the physician services, because each state has its own laws. But I think that now having all services at one platform is helping us to scale not into multiple states, but utilizing the same specialty physician services. We have now actually started servicing in the senior living facilities where there are no specialists there. And that way, I think we are providing not only the access, but we're also keeping the cost pretty low. So if you don't have insurance, you can see physicians, all the services at very affordable rates. And if you have insurance, we are contracted with insurance companies also. So you just pay your copay, and then so I think that's the model which we are utilizing and now expanding into all the other states.
And the difficult thing around the medical industry is that the costs tend to be, many months late, which a lot of you have touched on. And Nabil, with your advantage, you guys can actually see the cost benefits within hours because you can monitor, how much time a particular employee is spending with a patient and then compare that to previously. So can you expand a little bit about how that has been a driver for increasing the quality of the physical care through your digital tools?
Sure. I'm gonna take the question, if you don't mind. I'm gonna try to wrap in a couple of points that were brought up well by the other panelists. And I think one of the challenges in healthcare. So if you don't mind, Megan, I'm gonna start at a high level and I'll come down to the specific question. I think we've talked a lot about throughout the day how we spend over $4 trillion on healthcare in this country each year alone, right? And it's a huge number, yet at the same time, there are also two undeniable facts about healthcare in America today. So number one, we spend way too much money, right? And number two, people say they don't have enough healthcare. We don't have enough doctors. We don't have enough nurses. We don't get enough healthcare for what we're spending and what we need, right? And the problem with those two is that solving that problem is actually, they don't work together, right? If you want more service, you got to spend more money, right? If you want to spend less money, it means less service, right? And so we have this we're in this intractable problem, right? And the only way we're going to solve it is by figuring out how do we address the productivity issue in healthcare, right? One fact I love to talk about in healthcare as we think about where spending occurs. We always think about what's the most expensive aspect of healthcare. And if you ask the average person, drugs are crazy expensive, yet they only represent about 25% of healthcare spending. You think about surgery. Surgery is extremely expensive. Well, medical devices represent less than 5%. Diagnostic tools are about less than 2% of healthcare spending. Healthcare spending is dominated by one line item and one line item only, right? If you think of it from the standpoint of a CFO. And the closest comp for it is the hospitality industry. It's labor cost. Healthcare is the single biggest employer in practically every city in America. And if you go outside of San Francisco, Seattle, DC, New York, some of the high growth cities, and if you look at the next list of cities 11 through 200 in the US, the single biggest employer in those cities is always going to be either Walmart or the local healthcare, like the local hospital system. And that's without fail. And if you can't, so for us, right, the answer has to be some way to use technology to not just improve productivity by 1%, 2%, it's got to be 2x, 3x, 4x. Otherwise, we're never going to solve this issue of too much money and too few resources. Now, tying that back into the issue of kind of what we do and where we see an opportunity in healthcare, right, is if you look at it from the standpoint of the individual physician, right, whether it's in primary care or if you look at it systemically from a hospital standpoint, healthcare is also the only industry where the more experience, if you're a physician, the more experience you have, the less money you make. And the reason for that is that Medicare and the big insurance companies are constantly messing around with reimbursement, and it never keeps up. It rarely ever keeps up with inflation, right? So especially if you're a private practice, your costs of running your practice are always going up higher than your reimbursement. And the only solution to date has been, let's cram in more patients per day. So in the past, someone like my mother, who's a primary care physician, may have seen 15 to 20 patients a day, 30 years ago. Now, in order to keep her practice afloat, has to see 25 to 30 and beyond. And you reach an upper limit of what you physically can see without basically having, a mill of people just where you come in, spend 30 seconds with the doctor, and then run out the door. And so one of the ways you solve it, right, has to be, and I think Ahmad kind of alluded to this in his conversation, we have to figure out a way to leverage resources beyond just the physician. We have a limit of how many physicians are out there. They're already working at close to their peak of how many patients they can see. But there's a lot of other people who work as healthcare professionals in the system, nurses, medical assistants, care managers, et cetera. We need to find out ways that we can use technology or other tools to empower them to do more. Ideally, you do in a way that solves two problems. One, allow them to handle patient needs that are not necessarily complex and requiring a physician's attention. And two, you do it in a way that makes financial sense for the provider and their team. And for us, what we've been able to do and how we're able to unlock it is we've looked through reimbursement opportunities and plans and kind of married reimbursement incentives with incentives in labor productivity and allowing a physician to capitalize on the care that their team provides that typically they were providing at cost or out of their own pocket, but now allow that time to become billable. And that to me has become the key. It's not that physicians don't want to provide extra service, it's that they're limited in their time and their charitable impact is also limited because they can't just hire a team of many care managers to solve all the needs of their patients when they're not getting reimbursed for that.
So let me, if you, Megan, allow me to, Nabil brought up very good points. I think there's obviously telemedicine is something which can solve that access problem, the number of providers, and everyone knows I don't need to kind of emphasize the importance for the rural areas and all. Practically what we did is we found that nursing home, for example, senior living facilities, a lot of, that's where even Fahad mentioned, like the biggest spend for healthcare is coming from the patients who get discharged from the hospital, go to nursing home, keep coming back, readmissions, right? And one of the big challenges is the lack of specialty physicians at that nursing homes there. We started our physician service I left my nephrology full-time practice about 3 years ago and started working part-time, learning this whole curvature. And that's how we built our platform for specialty cares in the nursing home. So many challenges, EMR integration problem and all those things there. And it's not that there are the patients who have insurance, but the specialist physician did not want to go there because it was taking much longer time to see those patients while they could see patients there. On the other side, patient did not want to come. Nursing home was paying $500 or $400 for sending one patient to the physician office. Whereas as a physician, the only reimbursement you're getting seeing that patient who comes in a stretcher, $80 to $100 there. I remember I called at when I was sitting in my previous practice, I called at nursing home, said, I felt so bad for this patient who was brought on stretcher. I had seen this patient in the hospital. So seeing mostly in nephrology, you kind of see the labs and kind of make, medication adjustment. 2 people brought her from the nursing home in a stretcher and restrained. She was crying, screaming. And I felt, what if I could see this patient by telemedicine? Or go there. So I called that nursing home, and the key answer I found that was 5 years ago, who's going to give us reimbursement for the physician by telemedicine? Because Medicare at that time was only reimbursing physician if the patient was in the rural area, not in the nursing home. Good news is the COVID changed that. Now telemedicine reimbursement is permanent if the patient's at home. So you can see them patients at home, you can still bill it. Second, in the nursing home, it is kind of, for at least for now, it is being reimbursed there. So it's two problems solved that, specialist physician now improves access, patients, and the cost, decrease the cost of the nursing home, even for the transport, convenience. Readmission prevention was a big one there. One thing I think also is very important, which a lot of people miss there, is a continuation of care. We see this big names, Teladoc, Amwell, and all those things. They are great companies, great products there. But the problem is there's no continuation of care. You see a doctor, you may not see the doctor for the rest of your life there. I think it's what we are trying to envision or empower the local physician, that they all need to use the technology and build online clinics so they can actually continue to care for those patients they have seen either in the hospital, whether they go to nursing home or they go to the home. They can provide the same continuation of care. It's much more cost effective, and also kind of, it does improve the matrices there. So that, I think those with the reimbursement part being done, is just basically how technology can be adopted by the physician will help. And second, hopefully the shortage of physicians, there's no shortage of physicians in the US to my point of view, is because unfortunately every state requires physician to have a license. That's the biggest barrier, because if I'm a physician in Florida, I mean, it does not happen in any other part of the world. You just need one license and you can see patients across the country. Here, we are basically bound to have multiple state licenses and all. I think once that barrier goes away, which should go, then basically, one physician can see patient wherever without having need for having active license in each state.
Just to add to that, Vikas touched on that with the reimbursements, now we'll have more telehealth and be able to scale that. But there's one other very interesting aspect of it, especially with the aging population, is that because of the COVID, for the first time, they actually experienced what it means to get served by telehealth.
That is true.
We did a survey with our customer base sometime mid when the COVID was at its peak, and asked people, would they be open telehealth, or are they using telehealth? And we were surprised to see that most of them are. And then we asked them, what technologies are you using for telehealth? And what surprised us was, like, they'll say, I use FaceTime, I use Skype. No, nothing sophisticated, but whatever works great for them. So just the fact that they tried it, and not just the aging population. Myself, I tried telehealth for the first time last year. And I came to realization that, why didn't I do it before? It saved me that whole experience of setting up the appointment, waiting in the doctor's office. That's so painful. So for aging population and for everyone else, the fact that they used some aspect of telehealth in the last 10, 12 months, I think it's going to help serve the telehealth case very well in months and years to come.
So true.
Maggie, can I follow up on one point Fahd just made real quick? It's a really core point that, at least in my opinion, and when we think about elderly populations in particular, especially as it relates to technology, I think my mother might be on the line listening, so I'm going to apologize in advance. Hopefully I don't embarrass you too much. But, we often joke, in my family, or at least we used to joke, 10 years ago, I started my career as a software developer before going into banking, and, I've been around technology for, decades. But, for everything I know about technology and software design, my mother is like the inverse, right? She was about as much of a Luddite and as technology illiterate as you could possibly get 10 years ago. And, what I find fascinating is, you fast forward through the 2010s, and in my home, my sister and I joke, we call her the emoji queen now, because if you look at our family chats with how my mother talks to my nieces, I don't understand half the conversations. They're just talking in emoji. And what's happened is in the last 10 years, my mom didn't magically become a, some technology savvy, TikTok star. The technology just caught up to her. I think to Fahd's point about using FaceTime or Skype or whatever it is, people will use technology if it's easy and it's good. If technology is hard to use or creates barriers, they won't. And it doesn't really matter whether you're 70 or 17. And so what I want to stress is, I think if we're talking about elderly populations in particular, they will use technology if we make their lives simpler and easier.
Very true.
Wonderful. Well, in a moment or two, we're just going to jump to some of the audience questions. So in the audience, I know that a lot of different questions came through around user management, business model. So please just raise your hand and then we will call on you in just a moment. But to wrap up, I have three kind of final questions here. So what are the trends that people perhaps aren't thinking about right now that we should be thinking about? What are the things that are top of mind that aren't being talked about enough? So Dr. Waqas, I'll start off with you. Share with us what are the things that we should be thinking about?
So I guess definitely, I mean, again, this question is how to kind of especially for those new entrepreneurs, I think, entering in the healthcare. What I've seen is essentially, you know, that one company is doing and they basically try to do the same thing. Of course, you know, like I think what we have recently seen a lot of companies who have started with telemedicine, but focusing on the pharmacy side of the business. I think it's what we've seen, like, you know, this Row or the HIMSS and all this. So what I've seen is that there's a trend to treat one particular problem. And a lot of these companies have started doing is they're contracted with few doctors, contracted with the pharmacy. Okay, we are fixing this medication treatment. And literally, it was unfortunate to see that they're allowing patients to choose what medication they want. And on the back end, they were saying, okay, we will just, you know, have this medication shipped there. I think that is just a transient, because as a patient who has multiple problems, you're probably not going to see different startups who are basically focused on the pharmacy side. That you'll go to one startup to have medication for the diabetes, another one for your kidneys or for the migraine there, because there's no interaction. So for the entrepreneur, I think there's much more need for the products which are talking about the data integration on the back end, because I think that's what the future is. Second, of course, there's a lot more stress on AI, artificial intelligence. I think it's definitely a very fancy word. And of course, you know, but Nabil, you know, he's done an exceptional job there, because I think the AI is built on the data. I think for the technology, you have to try to build technology which is actually integrating different EMR systems. One of the big barrier for the AI companies was how to get the data there, because a lot of these big EMR companies initially they were not allowing data exchange. Thanks to the government policies, they're now making mandatory for the EHR to integrate. So that is where the opportunity is. Second, I think that, I don't know how many physicians are on this call there. There's so much need for the physicians' input there, because I think what I have learned, and also leading this company, we have our own IT team. IT team is pretty good people. They've developed great products there, but what needs to be built? I think the physicians are people who are working directly in healthcare, and also they can be they are a great architect to tell them. As Fad, you know, mentioned, when he actually experienced, he lived in nursing home for 2 or 3 months to learn the whole workflow there. I spent my whole 2 years for my practice really struggling to learn the process, and then basically, told what IT team what to be built there. So I think learning the workflow in healthcare is extremely important, because it's not only very complex, but also makes the life of the end user very easily. So that would be my 2 cents on that.
Well, that's perfect. And that was actually my next question was, what do you wish you knew before you started? And so really just learn the process. Well, wonderful. Reshma Haider, are you available? Would you like to ask your question? So if you are, please unmute yourself and ask your question. All right, well, it seemed like a very exciting question, so I'm going to ask it for her. My mother is 79, is a gaming queen playing Bridge and Candy Crush. Are there any gaming solutions for seniors using gaming for cognitive care? And what are the opportunities there? Kind of changing the mindset of, oh my gosh, I'm sick and now I need to deal with all the stress and all of that. And how can you transition it to something and be a little bit more fun? Have you guys seen anything there, or are there opportunities?
Can I speak, Megan? In addition, thank you.
Yes, please.
I don't know if you can. I like I mentioned earlier, I'm a cancer care person as well. Took care of my late husband for 11 years, and technology was a big benefit when it came to patient care. in distracting the patient during chemo, during testing. You know, you get poked so many times every time you go for chemo or you're testing. And what have we found, because if you happen to have a patient that is very adverse and suffers from anxiety from, you know, going to the hospital or have those white collar syndrome that they call, technology and gaming comes in really, really handy in those scenarios. And like I mentioned, what you just read, I have a 79-year-old mom who's perfectly fine healthcare wise, but I thought that she was addicted to gaming. But what I learned was watching her that she's actually doing this to keep alert, playing bridge and Scrabble, and then also connecting with the grandkids using games that they play, and it really helps use you know, the technology for her benefit. And are there any gamers or any investors in such products? And that was my question. Thank you.
I can answer that. So there are two companies that come to my mind that does that. So they provide gaming, and as you're playing games, they capture data and provides you reports on your physical, not physical, but more mental health. One of them is called It's Never Too Late, and the other one is called Linked Senior. So you can start from there.
If you don't mind me answering that, we just did a meta-analysis on this very topic, which was published in 2018. There's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of companies, Brain HQ, Lumosity, and all the others, but we're not there yet. And as far as truly, and there's plenty of opportunity because there's evidence that that can really profoundly affect cognition. So there's tremendous opportunity there. We're actually working on that very topic.
All right, just one last quick question from Adele Safdar. If you're available, I know that there are a few comments that came through. If you'd like to ask one of your questions. Adele Safar.
Hi, I'm here. All right, fantastic. Thank you very much. Well, first of all, wonderful to be present among such amazing guests and listeners. My quick question would be just, I'm just following up on the whole gaming scenario, that I feel that it's very empowering for the elderly folks and the older adults, of course, to be engaged with technology. However, I've definitely found that there is a bit of a learning curve, and I think one of the comments that was made is that the technology has to be made easy for people to use it. However, there is still a learning curve that is involved in it. Are there venues or are there any methods that can teach the elderly folks how to use the technology a little bit better? Like, do you think that we should be also focusing our efforts on some teaching aspects of the technology rather than just implementation of it?
I can answer that one first. When there's a learning curve, there's a problem. You know, if you have a technology and you're expecting that you're going to provide them training and learning and provide that again and again, that's a problem number one that needs to be solved. You know, we work very closely with Amazon and Google, and the whole idea is that, you know, you take the product and understand how they're going to use it and modify the product. So when we were having this challenge, we were building these mobile apps. We were building with some FaceTime, Face ID, Touch ID, trying to make it easy for older adults. And then I did a roadshow and found out that still there are like 60% of people that will not use the mobile because they don't want to use technology at all. And that was the aha moment for us. And then we started looking at the voice technology. Brought in Alexa and Google devices, and that became a game changer because there is no training. All you have to do is just ask a question, and actually the device learns about the adults. So I think the point is that, you know, when you're building the technology for this group, you know, the key is to figure out how can you build it so that there's no learning, no training required.
Well, I hope we can continue the conversation into the breakout rooms. So I will hand it back to Fahan, and you will be placed into breakout rooms to continue the exciting conversation. So thank you to all of our panelists. We really appreciate your insights and expertise into the fabulous questions that came through.
Great.
Thank you so much, Megan.
Thanks.
This has been an exciting session. I'm sure we learned a lot throughout the day today. Now comes the best part. We are going to announce the winner of our iWatch competition that we had scheduled. And I'm going to share my screen. Our winner for iWatch today is Adil Safdar. So Adil, if you are listening, I will reach out to you via email, and then we can coordinate how to get this delivered over to you. So we have 6 breakout rooms, as you can see on your screen. Each breakout room is going to have at least one startup founder present to have that discussion with you. We have taken the liberty to assign startup founders their breakout rooms based on their startup and on their interests as well. Each breakout room will also have moderators from Open Silicon Valley to steer discussion, make sure the conversation is orderly, and troubleshoot any issues that you might have. Please, select the breakout room you want to head into, and you can carry on your discussion there and ask any questions with the panelists there. Thank you.
Thank you,
Farhan. Thank you, Anjali, for putting